All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Super excited to welcome everybody as you join. We are really pumped to be able to spend some time with you guys today. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to ignite the spark of knowledge, hope, and camaraderie within our community. As everybody knows, TSW is a difficult journey, but you're not alone. And we're really excited about our day with you. We had so many topics and ideas that we had for the conference. We couldn't have as many sessions as we had ideas, so we're trying to get to the most that we can in the next 3.5 to 4 hours. So it may seem like it's a long time, but I promise if you hang with us, the time will absolutely fly by and you will feel inspired by what you learned today and hopefully pick up on a few tips as well. So you can see the screen here. We'll go through the agenda. But first, I want to say we had 200 and I think it's more than 250 registrants for the conference. And you guys are coming to us from all over the world. So thank you so much for those of you in Australia. You're up in the middle of the night. Those of you joining from Israel, please be safe. I'm hoping that those registrants were able to make it. But really appreciate the time that you'll spend with us today. So the agenda that we'll cover today, you will hear from others that have been through this long healing journey that is TSW syndrome. You will hear from Eastern and Western thoughts on TSW syndrome from medical experts and insight from a mental health practitioner as well, who's also gone through the healing process of TSW. I have said, thanks to Joey Van Dyke, that TSW syndrome makes us all activists. And it's not well known, the syndrome is not well known or understood. So you will be welcomed into the activist community with some practical ways to advocate for change, depending on where you are in your journey. We will also have a very short but very special guided mindfulness meditation from yet another TSW warrior. And you will have the opportunity to talk with others in a couple of peer group breakout sessions. I feel like we had one a few minutes before the conference started. So it's awesome to see everybody continuing to join. So the mission of ITSAN is to raise awareness of topical steroid withdrawal syndrome and support affected individuals. You can see the organizations along the banner on the bottom, those that we partner with and are members of. Our goal is prevention, early detection, accurate diagnosis, and proper treatment of TSW syndrome. Clearly, we know we have a long way to go. Some of the things that ITSAN has been working on, it's astounding to me. You wouldn't believe possibly that ITSAN is such a small group of dedicated volunteers, but we really are just 5 or 6 strong, and we've done amazing things, I feel like, in the last year. Specifically, the work that Kelly Barta and Kathy Tullis has done with some of the nonprofits in the industry has really sort of elevated the brand of ITSAN. We've been working with the Allergy and Asthma Network on a collaboration project for the steroid stewardship. So this is helping medical practitioners understand the impacts of steroids. We also, Kathy and I presented at the National Dermatology Nurse Association. This is in the US. They had a national conference, when was that, last month? It wasn't that long ago, just a few weeks ago. And we were able to speak to all the dermatology nurses in the US, which is a fantastic win, I think, for ITSAN. The groundwork that Kelly Barta and Kathy Tullis has also put in place helped us with really engaging with the FDA. That's an ongoing conversation. They're the ones that are responsible for management of steroid medications, all medications, but clearly we care about the steroids. But we're in formal dialogue with the FDA, and our hope really is to change the medication and the labels on steroids. We absolutely would not be here without your support. We did not ask for a conference fee for today. So if you are able, and we do recognize that a lot of people just can't work because of TSW syndrome, so we don't typically hit fundraising requests very hard. Maybe we should do more, I don't know, but if you are able to support us, we would really appreciate any donation whatsoever, especially if you can set one up under a recurring basis. So a given amount each month really helps us a lot. And it also helps us with understanding the funding that's coming in the next months, right? We have a certain number of members that give every month. Really appreciate your help there. One of the way that you can give, if you do shop on Amazon, you can go to smile.amazon.com. We have right now 292 people in our community that do support us in this way. And Amazon, not you, but Amazon will donate 0.5% of all eligible purchases to ITSAN. So I just looked this up yesterday. We've been given a total of $3,000 over the years. This is from day one, a few years ago to now, total. So that's a significant sum for us. Most recently in February, we were given about $230. So that's just one other super easy way that you can help. Smile.amazon.com. All right, so now I get to introduce you to some of my favorite people in my life, hopefully in your life. But before I get all to the introductions for the board, just a couple of housekeeping notes. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with how Zoom works, but you'll want to select the side-by-side on your Zoom under the view so that you can see both the speaker or the presenter and the slides that the person is sharing. There will also be some poll questions throughout the day. So these are just questions that we put up, nothing too elaborate, but if you can answer those questions when they pop up, then when the poll closes, we can all see how everyone else answered as well. So let's start with our esteemed president, Kathy Tullis. Come on, technology. There we go. So Catherine is a nurse from Houston, Texas, with a degree in communications. She was a bedside nurse in pediatrics for 7 years before her little one began suffering severely from TSW syndrome. She joined ITSAN in 2015 and is almost single-handedly responsible for the content and research that you find on the ITSAN website. So I want to make this a little interesting for everybody too. And if we can all share one, at max, Catherine Tullis, 3 tips, your favorite tips for getting through TSW. That would be awesome.
Okay, so right now?
Yeah.
Yes.
You're
okay.
on.
Here we go. I have 3 tips. And just to preface this, I want to say everybody's really different. And we all know that, like what works for some won't work for others. So this is just what worked for us. So my son is the one who went through TSW. He was pretty much the whole time he was 4 years old. And for him, he's very allergic to plants and nuts. And so we were trying to do kind of all natural route, and he was just like breaking out. And so for us, it was kind of like the faker, the better as far as emollients. So Vaseline we used for a while because it doesn't sting. And then a product called Theraplex emollient. We had to buy it online, and it was really mild, and it's very thick and sticky, but it did the trick. The other thing I would suggest is time. We tried so many things back and forth, trying a million things. Stung, he broke out. It was just like, finally I was like, guess what? We're not trying more stuff. We're just doing, water in the bath if we take one, and very basic things. The other thing I would suggest, which is actually my top tip, is go into therapy and know that you will need it. I think from the very beginning, if you're in a couples therapy, get therapy even for your child if they're going through this, and for yourself. It's easier now, actually, in COVID times, because everything has kind of turned virtual. So even if you're bedridden or whatever, you can do that. So I would say expect that this would be a kind of a traumatizing journey you'll have to work through, and please get help. And that's my number 1 tip. Back to you, Jodie.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine Tullis. Next, we have some latency here. Jolene McDonald. Jolene has been with us since the summer of 2019. Her son is 6 years TSW, and her heart is with the TSW caregiver community specifically, after tending to her son's medical needs and trying to protect him from being further harmed by the treatment prescribed. Before joining us, Jolene was a teacher of the deaf and a former children's case manager. Jolene, what is your favorite tip for getting Max through TSW?
Thanks, Jodie. Hi, everybody. Well, Max is almost 7 years TSW now. He's 11 years old, and I will start with his top tips really quick. He said, find a hobby. And he said, mine is more physical and my legs can stand it. He's now able to use a scooter, which is really wonderful. But he said, find a hobby because it can be a distraction, and find a good stretching position if you are comfortable. He said he likes doing the child pose. Never really seen him do that, but I don't want to minimize that suggestion. I think he probably does it on his own time. And he said, and be with friends. And he's absolutely right. Those are some really important tips. And I would say for mine as a caregiver, have hope. You're not going to feel like yourself at all going through any of this. You're practically not going to remember even how to smile at times, but you will find yourself. And like Kathy said, reach out for help. For us, seeing a counselor for Max was probably one of the top, or not, if not best things we did. Just as important as seeing any medical provider, just to work through the fear and the anxiety, and even how to manage the physical pain of TSW, and to know that it's temporary and to know you can get through it, but just strategies for the way our brains work through trauma. So I'm so grateful that we did that. We didn't do it right away, but I think if there's a way for you to do it, it lifted my heart just to be sitting in on some of his sessions. So it takes time and it takes strength, but I think my message to you all is that if we could make it through, there's no doubt you all will as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jolene. Next, Kelly Barta. Kelly is our former president and still serves on the board after an experience with a long TSW journey in which, and this, I still can't believe this, she was bedridden for 18 months. She's our key industry advocate and is largely responsible for developing partnerships with similar-minded industry nonprofits, and has also been very successful in affecting policy at the grassroots advocacy level, which we'll learn more about today. She is also currently the president of the Coalition of Skin Diseases as well. Kelly, what is your favorite tip?
First of all, just want to say how happy I am to be here. This is just so amazing. I mean, we had an ITSAN conference 2 years ago, and it was 30 of us in my home in person. And this is just so cool to be able to open it up to all of our members worldwide, because many of us are stuck anyway at home, and an in-person meeting is really difficult to travel to. So I'm just so overjoyed at where we have come as a community and being able to support one another. I want to say my tips that really helped me get through TSW physically is listen to my body. You're going to hear a lot of stuff from a lot of different places, and really, you know what you're going through the best, and listen to that. So there's a lot of different therapies, and everyone kind of has to choose their own way. We're all a little bit different anyway, physiologically. And then mentally, because we all know that can be as much or even more of a burden than the physical can be. I found for me to every morning when I would wake up, find things to be grateful for and start listing those things, because it was almost like I had two paths. I could look at my skin, I could just let it all kind of sink in, like where I was and how scary it was, the support I wasn't receiving that I needed. I could focus on that, or I could focus on what I did have. I have a bathtub, I have clean linens, I have enough food, I have that. And it just completely changed my mindset. And put me in a place where I was actually able to calm down. And I know that stress is a big part of exacerbating it anyway. So being thankful, finding things to be thankful for, but I also found ways to give. And even if you're in bed, like I was for a long time, you can still reach out and call someone. My grandmother had broken her hip and was bedridden. So I would try to reach out to her, talk to her, write people letters. I had a friend who was in prison. But it always helps to know I have something good to give back to the world too. I'm not just a complete burden on society right now. We all have something that we can give. So those are my two mental therapy tips.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle. So Michelle is our newest board member. She just joined us earlier this year after moving from Singapore to Toronto in Canada. Her day job is serving as a data scientist, which sounds so cool, at a large e-commerce platform company. And she's also leading our social media strategy as well. Michelle, what's your favorite tip?
Thanks, Jodie. I feel like you guys got real deep in that. When I was thinking about my tip, I was like, get a good vacuum. You can't go wrong with a good vacuum, because at the end of the day, we're going to be shedding. You don't have to worry about what's accumulating. Just hoover that up. Just hoover it up. So that's my number one tip, along with the good mental health tips that we've gotten from the other board members. Okay, well, I'll try to speak louder. I'm going to take this off. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Michelle.
I just wanted to say, if you couldn't hear Michelle, her tip was get a good vacuum. And I think that's a great, it was kind of hard for us to hear. Michelle, do you want to test your microphone?
Yeah, great. Can you guys hear me now? How's the audio?
Yes, so much better.
I heard it. I heard her originally too, so I think we're okay.
A lot in the chat are saying they couldn't hear her.
Oh, okay.
And I couldn't hear. But I hear you now.
Just a good vacuum.
Yes, I agree. We had a vacuum dedicated solely to my son's bed, and that's all we did was his skin flakes. That he had his own vacuum. So I agree.
Yes. So I have been active with ITSAN since 2018 after a midnight epiphany of realizing that I'm up and miserable every single night, and my doctor has no idea. And indeed, none of our doctors have an idea of what we're actually dealing with, which to me was a real open loop, because nothing's going to change if they never get the word, right? And so I put together some advocacy tips and some things that I could do to change that. I am 5 years TSW now, and although my face is healed, my biggest symptom still is itch. And I work full-time as a tech industry analyst relations director for a cybersecurity firm. And Kathy somehow convinced me to take on the role of treasurer, which I'm still getting up to speed on. But my favorite tip, I have to say, and it's going to be a little weird because I've got some props here that I'm going to have to show on camera, but my favorite tip has to do with ice bags. So fill an ice bag, right? This one's not frozen. And I put mine, because my arms are the ones that are so itchy, I'll put this ice bag on a bottle and see how it kind of forms around it. And then it freezes that way, like this one has. And I'm able to set it on my arm and just go about my business. And it doesn't slip off. It covers a lot of the space. I feel like you could do that for the legs as well. I set mine on my shoulders because I'm super itchy on my shoulders and chest, even still. So I'll just kind of move it around, maybe as I'm watching TV or whatever. But I love that tip, and I hope you guys love it too. It's the number one thing in 5 years that I have been able to use every day. And I'm telling you, I was slipping this into my bag going to work, and I'd pull it out, in the restroom or in my car or whatever if I needed a few minutes of relief. So, since some of these overachievers gave more than one tip, I'm going to indulge and because we've got a couple of minutes, my other tip. My kids were pretty young. I'm 5 years TSW, and I have a 10 and an 11-year-old. So for half their life, I've been red, itchy, oozing, flaking. So I somehow, I'm very thankful that my brain was able to do this. I didn't want them to be exposed to me being cranky and just upset, and I didn't want them to be around the negativity of that. So somehow I've been able to compartmentalize it. So TSW is its own thing. It's on me, it's in me, but it's not me. Do you know what I mean? So I compartmentalize it. So that way, when my child comes in and I'm completely miserable, I put a smile on my face, say hello. I didn't want them to be exposed to the negativity of that. So ice bags, medical grade. Do not get this stuff from the drugstore down the street. And compartmentalization is what I'll call that. It's my 2 tips. So next, we will move on to the Eastern perspective of TSW. And I want to introduce Dr. Olivia Friedman. She's actually gotten to know many of us in the TSW community over the last few years after a chance encounter with Kelly Barta at an industry conference. Dr. Friedman will be talking with us about how the Eastern medicine perspective works on TSW syndrome, the perspective of Eastern medicine. She's a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. She's also the chair of the board of directors of the American Society of Acupuncturists. And my favorite thing about her, though, is that she has a very narrow specialty that's quite relevant for us. She focuses on TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, for dermatology conditions specifically. And this was after a healing experience that she had using herbs that her grandmother taught her about when she was younger. So welcome, Olivia, Dr. Friedman. Thank you so much for joining us. And I will stop sharing and turn this over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for that great introduction, Jodie, and thank you, ITSAN, so much for inviting me today. I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of you and being brought into many of your lives, and it's really been an interesting experience. I think one of the things, and you know what, I'm going to share my screen. Hold on one second. Sorry. All right. One of the things that keeps on coming up every time I meet with people is, people will ask me, what kind of food should I be staying away from, or what kind of food should I take, or does NMT work, or should I do infrared therapy? Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I try Dupixent? And even when I start to treat people, a lot of people are asking like, well, how come you're giving me totally different herbs than you're giving somebody else? Because I'm checking with my friends. And even when we meet from time to time, every single appointment, like I'm giving people different herbs. And so one of the things that I'm kind of realizing is that we just don't talk about uniqueness in the medical field at all. And I guess it kind of makes sense because the way we kind of look at it in the Western model is that you have this condition and you have these drugs that you're supposed to use to make it better, and everybody gets the same thing. But we all know that that's not really the case. I mean, we all know that with TSW, especially, everyone's experience is completely different. I mean, for example, how it presents. I mean, all of you have said things to me like, I've got this elephant skin, I've got oozing, I've got zingers. Some other people will say I have this bone deep itch. And then other people will say, well, not exactly. It's just sort of like a little bit of an itch. Some people have the red sleeves. Some people, it actually gets into other things like their energy levels or, how much sleep they're getting. Or, a lot of people have said, I'm snowing everywhere. Some people are drenched at night. Some people aren't, and some people, it actually affects their emotional being as well. They get really restless and anxious, or they're even hyper aware or hypersensitive. And then other people, it starts to, manifest in their digestive system. So it's really very different for everybody. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. I don't know why this is clicking the wrong way. Sorry. For some reason, this doesn't want to move forward. Here we go. Okay. All right. So another thing is that it's presenting differently in different places, right? I mean, some of you say that it's in your upper body. Some of you say it's the lower body. Some of you say it's the torso or the extremities or whatnot. And it's a different combination for everybody, right? I think when I go into the Facebook site that you guys all participate in, I see pictures of completely different things. And when you come to me in the clinic, I mean, you have a completely different combination of things as well. So what I'm seeing is that everybody has a really different experience of TSW, and everybody has a really different combination of symptoms. Everybody shows up differently in terms of where it is on their body, and everyone's life is impacted completely differently as well. I mean, I have patients who come in and they live a quote unquote normal life, in that they're still active, they're still doing things every day, they're still, gainfully employed, they're able to continue their relationships and whatnot. And the only thing that's really their biggest issue is that maybe their appearance has been compromised to some degree. But then I also have a bunch of patients who will come to me and it's really started to affect, how they feel about being with other people. They can't. Either because of how they look or how they feel, or because they just cannot deal with, the constant judgment and things like that. And at that point, it starts to compromise your actual lifestyle and your human connections, right? But then I have another group of people who are spending, all of their time in bed, or they're completely homebound, and they feel like their symptoms are just 100% uncontrollable. It starts to really depress them, and they really start to wonder if they want to be on this earth, and it gets really, really serious because they're suffering so much. And at that point in time, we're talking about a really compromised emotional and psychological outlook as well. So there's every single situation from either extreme, and there's everything in between. So it's really clear to me that everybody is really unique, and everybody's version of TSW is unique. And shouldn't we be taking that into consideration when we actually treat people? So one of the things that makes TCM a little bit different than the Western model is that the TCM provider is really trying to ask a lot of questions to really kind of sift through all of your different signs and symptoms. Because what we do is we kind of put together a pattern of what you're kind of creating. And then from that pattern, we can kind of figure out like what the root cause is. So what I feel like my job is like as a TCM provider is very similar to what we used to do when we were younger, and look at these, two different pictures and try to figure out, what makes them different. So it's those details that really make the difference in terms of like how I'm going to treat somebody. And if you look at these two different pictures, they look very, very similar, and they're really hard to see like what the big differences are. But if you look really carefully, there really are 5 different differences. And those differences are going to make a huge deal in terms of the clues that are going to help me to figure out what the source of your problem is, and then figure out how to actually treat that. So the way that TCM actually views TSW is we kind of look at basically 4 different areas, and everybody has sort of a combination of all of these things. There's always some element of heat, there's always some element of dampness, there's always some element of dryness, and there's some element of itch, which in Chinese medicine we oftentimes call wind. One of the reasons why these descriptors might seem a little bit more poetic than medical is because TCM was actually codified long before we had microscopes and cadaver labs. And so it actually started like 2,500 years ago when they started to think about this medicine. And so a lot of it is based on observations of the natural world. And the idea was this sense of the human body is essentially a microcosm of the macrocosm of the larger world. So that's why you'll hear a lot of terms that make sense in the natural world, but they don't really make sense in terms of how we look at Western medicine at this point in time. But even though we have these really simplistic terms, the Chinese actually figured out a pretty sophisticated system of diagnosis. So for example, when we talk about that heat that you're always talking about, that's radiating and whatnot, we actually have decided, or not we, not me personally, but the Chinese schematic is essentially that there's 4 different levels that the heat could actually be in. And so, for example, if your body is like having full body erythema, you're radiating heat, sometimes you feel chills or cold, your skin is really slow to heal, and you have these chronic ulcers all the time, we say that you have a level of heat that's called toxic heat. And the strategy to actually start to treat that would be to eliminate the heat, bring your body's ability to self-regulate temperature back. But if you're somebody who has something that's slightly different, like for example, you're really hot, but it happens a lot more at night. And let's just say you have a hard time sleeping, you have severe insomnia, you're incredibly thirsty, but for some reason you never really want to drink water. And when you scratch yourself, you're able to draw blood, and most of your lesions are in the upper body. Then we say that your symptoms kind of describe this level of heat that's called blood level heat. Another kind of heat is very, very different. And let's just say you have a lot of redness in your face, you're feeling this heat all the time, and you're super thirsty all the time, and you're actually drinking water all the time. Let's say you're sweating a lot. You might even find that you have like this bitter taste in your mouth. You're feeling really restless and anxious all the time. And maybe you're even having some constipation. These kind of symptoms kind of describe a different level of heat, and we call this chi level heat. And then lastly, the most superficial level of heat, not to say that it's not any less uncomfortable, but it's a different level. We call this wave level heat. And in those kind of situations, we'll have things like folliculitis a lot. You'll have a lot of these red bumps. Maybe you'll have swelling of the lips, or maybe you'll have hives. So as you can see, there's like very different things that happen at different levels. And you can actually have, with TSW, heat at all 4 levels. You can have it in a combination of different levels. And so that's why I'm asking you a lot of questions to try to figure out where all these things are manifesting. The second thing that we look at a lot of is, to what degree are you damp and dry? Every single person has some degree of both, and it's really trying to figure out what the ratio is. So we really, really make a big point of treating very differently, people who have really dried, lichenified elephant skin versus somebody who has really wet, oozy, weeping skin. So for example, if you have something that's like red and oozing and you have yellow crusted lesions on your arms or legs, we would say that you have something called damp heat. And that presentation would allow me to start thinking about, how do I stop that oozing in your body? And how do I help you stop overproducing exudate? And how do I help you dry up that overproduction and allow your body to return to that appropriate production level and circulation of fluids? But in the case of like a dry lichenified lesion, what we would say is you have something else called more of a dry heat. And that strategy would be focused on promoting production and circulation of body fluids. We also want to increase the nutrients that are going to help to regenerate your skin. In Chinese medicine, another thing that's really different than the Western world is that we often associate certain organs in the body with the actual production of these fluids. And they don't necessarily translate exactly to the organs of the Western anatomical body. So I'm not even going to go into that because it's a lot more explanation. But essentially, these particular systems produce those body fluids. And so what we do is we focus on these organ systems. And what we try to do is either calm them down or ratchet them up in terms of production. So we look to the circulatory similarly to what the Western anatomical system does, but we also consider something else, which is like this Chinese meridian system. And you might be familiar with it because it's basically all the different pathways that acupuncture points are on. And when we can identify those particular systems, then we can actually treat that too. So let me give you an example of a lot of different patients who come into me and they say that they have a lot of issues like behind their ears, inside the ears, like around the eyes, on the flanks of their bodies, like in the nipple and genital area, sometimes like underarm. This is one meridian in the Chinese system. And so it flows through all of the different areas. So if I can just figure out that that's the meridian that's affecting you, then I can actually choose herbs that will gravitate towards those particular meridians and circulate within those meridians. So the last thing that damp and dry can be really, really well influenced by, as you all know, is the environment that you live in, the climate that you're living in, the season that we're in, as well as like your constitution. As I think somebody else mentioned earlier today, everybody's constitution is completely different, and it gives you the propensity to lean one way or another, whether you're damp or dry. Some people actually are right in between, and then some people kind of, are on either side. So that's something that we take into consideration as well. And lastly, damp and dry can be a result of the other types of heat that I was talking about. So if you have those levels of heat for an extended amount of time, and there's no time period, it's very different for everybody, that can actually cause you to start having trouble either producing adequate moisture or circulating fluids. So, patients who have like a lot of dry stools, or they have a low-grade fever at night, or maybe they have a lot of night sweats, or they have this low-grade thirst all the time, but they don't want to drink anything. What I do is I take all of those different clusters of symptoms and I figure out what that pattern is, and then that's how we treat. So another thing that makes TCM a little bit different is we actually qualify different types of itch. It's not just one type of itch. We actually have 11 types of itch that we identify, and we treat them all differently. For TSW, we actually have 9 different types that apply. And so here are the ones that probably sound familiar to you guys. With wind itch, that is something that typically occurs on the upper body more often than it does on the lower body. For damp itch, because fluids tend to gravitate low, they tend to be in the lower body. Heat itch tends to be something that's more of a burning hot and prickly itch that gets worse as the day gets longer. And we treat that really differently than somebody who has a dry itch, which typically leads to like a more fine brand-like scaling that often comes with like fissured skin as well. Deficiency itch is sort of like when you feel like there's insects crawling underneath your skin. It often occurs when the weather's getting colder, and if there's a sudden change in outside temperature, or sometimes when people have allergies, they have that too. Cold itch is something that typically happens like when your skin is exposed to cooler temperatures. It typically is on the face and the hands, and a lot of times it's accompanied with hives. Stasis itch is something that's incredibly severe feeling. It does not abate until you basically like rub so hard or scratch so hard that you damage your skin, and it always leads to bleeding, but the bleeding is slightly different than someone who has wind itch, because that blood is a little bit darker in color. And then toxic itch, which I think you're going to find most relatable, is this adverse reaction to medicines. And it leads to this widespread erythema. It has really severe and burning kind of feeling, and it's incredibly prickly. And lastly, there's food itch. And that's basically something that's related to food allergies. It usually comes with hives, angioedema, sometimes even some vesicles. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Olivia, that sounds pretty easy to figure out how to diagnose me, right? Like all I have to figure out is what level of heat am I at, and what kind of itch do I have, and what kind of damp or dry do I have? So then you can just figure out what herbs I need, right? Isn't that easy? Well, it's not quite that cookie cutter, because what typically happens is most people who come in to see me don't match a particular type. And what happens is they are typically a hybrid of all different symptoms. And not only that, all of these I can't talk today, symptoms, as you all know, exist on a continuum, right? And not only that, they morph and they change as the condition gets better or worse. And as you know, they can happen and change like every single day. So going back to that example that I had mentioned about, find the 5 differences, it really makes a big difference for me if those differences we liken to TSW symptoms. It really makes a difference for me to be able to say, like in this picture, do you have 1 cloud or 2 clouds? Do you have missing panels from your windmill, or is the whole entire turbine gone? Or, that little duck that was moving in the wrong direction, like was he totally in the opposite direction, or was he just slightly off? So if you liken all of those kinds of differences to TSW symptoms, that's what I'm looking for when I'm talking to you. And that's why I'm asking you a million different questions. It's all to suss out all these different things so that I can figure out, what is it that you're looking like? What's the pattern that you're fitting into? And then how can I treat that? But to complicate things even more, we also have to take into consideration a bunch of other things. And when I'm putting together formulas, it's really important to me to know exactly what your allergies and your food sensitivities are, because I don't want to choose any herbs that are in families of things that you're probably not going to be able to handle. I also need to know what are the different health conditions that you have in addition to what's going on with your skin, and what kind of medications are you taking, because we obviously don't want to do anything that's contraindicated, and we don't want to make your medicines any less effective by adding herbs that are going to, make them do different things. I also need to know, like, what kind of environment are you living in right now? I mean, are there things that are sort of exacerbating your situation because you're in a more damp climate or more dry climate or whatnot. Even things like, your job and your lifestyle. I've got a number of people who've got, a lot of pustules on their hands and they work with their hands all day long. And so I'm going to treat them very differently than somebody who's probably home and can wear a glove all day long and, put medicines underneath it and things like that. So lifestyle really comes into play. Body weight and constitution. Whether you're a baby or a kid or a teenager or an adult, you're all going to weigh different amounts. And so the dosages have to match that. I also need to know what your propensity is in terms of your constitution. If you tend to lean on the damp side, I'm probably going to go stronger in some other herbs. And if you lean on the dry side, I'm going to go stronger in a different direction. I also want to really understand like the severity of your symptoms. I mean, as you all know, yes, you have red skin, but some people have super red skin and some people have sort of pink skin, right? So I'm going to treat that very differently. And even if I use that same herb or a similar herb, it's going to be a much different dosage, or maybe I combine it with other things to be more for you. We also look at the locations of lesions, as I already mentioned, and I'm also looking for unique reactions. For every single medicine there is out there, there's a percentage of people who just have weird reactions to them. And so I always do a 5-day trial with all of my patients to make sure they can take herbs at all. But then there's always like once in a while, I get somebody who just has a strange reaction to either the whole formula or maybe one ingredient. And then we have to suss out like which ingredient that is. And then we have to kind of figure out like what's changed since the last time I saw you. Did you have a flare in between? Did something else come up? Did you eat something that caused you to have a reaction? So there's a lot of different things that we have to consider and think about whenever we're putting together an herbal formula. So what I'm trying to say is basically, you're all very similar, but you're all incredibly different. And it's really the difference between saying like all apples are the same. No, they're not. All fruits are the same. No, they're not. And, the difference between, a regular fruit and a dried fruit is the same. And it's like, no, they're really different. They're incredibly different. And so we really have to take into account how those differences play into what your treatment is. And that's the best thing that we can do. So just to summarize, the things that we look at when we're looking at TCM is we're trying to really understand like what are the unique components of your TSW picture. I'm really trying to get a better sense of like what your symptoms are, what body regions are affected, what impact it has on your life. We're trying to figure out like what pattern is that creating, whether we're looking at the 4 levels of heat or damp or dry, or what kind of itch you have. And then we're taking into consideration all those other unique factors that make you you. So I know that's a lot of information. It was very, very quick, but basically the message I'm trying to say is that TSW is incredibly unique. And what TCM can do for you is to provide a customizable approach that will match your uniqueness as best as we can. So if you want more resources to learn more, this is a really cursory view of what TCM is all about. I have a TSW e-course that talks a lot about how we actually use TCM to treat. I have a number of different case studies of a lot of different ITSAN members that you can see, their before and after. There's also a video that kind of gives you an idea of like what it would look like to actually work with somebody. There's articles and podcasts, and then there's FAQs. So I just want to say thanks so much for having me today. It's an honor to be part of this family and to help to support everybody. And I really am so grateful for all the work that ITSAN does to bring about awareness and to really build a community so that people don't feel alone, because as you all know, it's a really difficult journey. So whatever I can do to help, please reach out and let me know. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Olivia. If you can hang out for about 10 minutes, we'd love to do a Q&A with you. And we do have some questions that have come through, but I'd like to kick off the poll though first. And let's get that question out to the community. Have you ever worked with a holistic or alternative healthcare provider? I'll give you a minute to answer that. While you're answering that, Olivia, we did get some really interesting questions already come through. And guys, if you have other questions, please post them to the chat. One question, Olivia, that came up is, will acupuncture help without herbs?
Acupuncture is a good supportive treatment. I would say that it helps to kind of like bring down the response in your body so that it can kind of just relax a little bit more. But I would say one of the things that's really difficult about acupuncture, depending on what your TSW looks like, is that obviously we're going to have to insert needles in all different parts of your body. And a lot of people have like a lot of exposed skin or really raw skin. And so lots of times that just kind of irritates things further. So I would say, you know, depending on what your TSW looks like, it can definitely be an adjunct and something that's helpful. One thing that I like about the herbs is it's something that you can do every day, and it's something that affects your body on a daily basis, whereas acupuncture, most people can't do that every day. Maybe you can go once a week, twice a week. But I really found that in my own practice, as well as when I was actually trying to treat myself for eczema, I really found that the daily usage of the herbs and the being able to affect that condition every single day was actually more helpful.
Great, thank you. We had some questions too come through, Dr. Friedman, about finding a TCM doctor globally. We've got a very global community on, and kind of a sub question: do you treat people in other countries or in the UK specifically?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There are practitioners all over the world who have been trained at, like myself, but I have to be honest, there's not a lot of us. I think there's 100 of us to date. So as a result, there is a website that you can go to, and you know, I'll post it on the chat when I get to it. But yeah, I do treat people all over the world. It is something that I felt really it was important to be able to do. You know, I sort of jumped on the telemedicine bandwagon way before COVID even hit. And the reason was because I really felt like it was important to get to the people who really needed the help. So I actually work with a pharmacy in New York City who can ship to all over the world. Now, having said that, there are some countries that have some unusual customs. For example, I did have somebody who was in a Virgin Island, I think, and they only ship things once a month. And so they were not able to get their herbs during the time that they were there. So we do have to check out some of those things to just make sure, but I do treat people all over. I just ask that people work with central time zone work hours, which I usually work between 12 and 7, just to accommodate people in different places. I think people in the UK, I usually see earlier in the day. People in Australia, I usually see later in the day. And so we usually work it out that way.
Great, thank you. How long does TCM treatment last?
So that's a really great question. And it's really hard to answer that with a definitive answer. It really depends on you. It depends on, you know, what is the severity of your TSW? How long have you had it? You know, what other systems have been affected as a result of your having TSW? And it also depends on how you respond to herbal medicine. I'll be really frank, there's a percentage of people who just don't respond to herbal medicine at all. I think every single medicine, there's always somebody. So that's a possibility. But you know, for those people who do respond, they usually see something happening all along the way. They can be really subtle changes at the very beginning, and then as time goes on, they can see more remarkable things with their skin. But usually if you see something changing, you know, that's incentive to keep going. And then that's what keeps people going. I usually say, give yourself a couple months just to see how you respond. And then you can kind of gauge, you know, how quickly you're responding and see, you know, what kind of results that you're getting. And I'm really honest with people. I mean, if I really don't think that things are moving as quickly or not happening at all, I mean, I'll say, I think we need to have a talk, and I think we really need to decide whether or not this is the right thing for you, or if we should take a completely different approach. So, you know, I want people to be happy in my clinic. I don't want them to just be here spending money for no reason. So,
yes. Dr. Friedman, will eczema patches spread even while going on TCM?
So, you can have flares throughout treatment. And I think you notice that, you know, without treatment, you're having flares and things are up and down and ebbing and flowing all the time. So that doesn't change because that's actually part of the picture, right? That's part of the condition. But what does change is that as you're getting treated over time, what you should see is the intensity of those flares going down, and you should see the frequency of those flares becoming less frequent until you get to a point where it's just not happening at all. So, you know, at the beginning, people get very nervous because they'll have a flare and they'll say, oh, is it the herbs? And, you know, I'll say, well, did you have flares before you had the herbs? And they'll go, oh, yeah, I did. And I'll say, well, it's not that the herbs are causing this flare. It's just that you're having a regular flare. And then we're going to have to go through a few of them to kind of see how you're responding. And if they're getting better over time, then we know the herbs are working. So I don't know. Did that answer your question?
I think it did.
Okay.
We have another question from Jamie. I think it's like 2 a.m. where he is. So thanks for hanging in there. Or maybe you're a female. Apologies, I'm not sure. Jamie says, I found that TCM doctors generally like to be able to do physical examinations like checking pulse, tongue, these kinds of things. How do you work past those requirements with virtual appointments?
So I specialize in dermatology, and I would say that probably a lot of TCM practitioners are general practitioners. It would be the difference between seeing a dermatologist and like a general GP, right? So the thing that I do is I make sure that people send me photographs before every single appointment. And so I can get a really good sense of what your lesions look like and I can compare them to the pictures I had of you before. I have a file on every single patient so I can compare. But as I mentioned before, like I'm always asking a million questions during every single intake. And that really gives me an idea of like what's going on in the background in terms of all those other things that I just mentioned in the presentation. And those things are the most important things. I do have people send pictures of their tongue. I think they think it's very funny at the beginning, but then they kind of get used to it. And, you know, pulse is not as important to me because dermatology is such a physically visual condition that looking at the skin really helps. I would say there's a lot of other conditions where there's nothing to look at. I mean, it's all internal. And in those cases, the pulse comes in to play a lot more.
Makes sense. For those that are seeing a naturopath and are on a number of different natural supplements, the question is, would we need time off all of the supplements before starting TCM, or is it something that can work in parallel?
There's, for the most part, I would say probably 90% of the things that you would come in to tell me that you're on, I would say, you know, if you want to continue these things, they're probably going to be fine. TCM is essentially, I mean, it's mostly vegetal. There's stems and leaves and, you know, flowers and roots and things like that. And so your body can metabolize it pretty easily because it's made of things that your body is used to actually seeing. There's a couple of things every once in a while where I definitely know that there's going to be a little bit of an issue, and we talk about that. And that's one of the reasons why my intakes are so long, because I'm really trying to do a thorough job of looking at every single thing that you are taking to really understand if there's going to be any issues with any of the herbs that I'm probably going to give you. But I would say most of the time, there's not really too many problems. And you can also take regular medications as well most of the time when you're taking TCM. I have a lot of people who come to me with when they're like, you know, taking Dupixent or they're taking an immunosuppressant or, you know, something else. So we can usually work with most things.
Right. Did we look at the poll results? Amy, can we bring those up? The poll results from whether we see there we go. So it looks like 63% of you have worked with a holistic or alternative healthcare provider. I guess that means we're more open-minded to this avenue of healing, right? 37% said no. Awesome. All right, we are doing so good on time. I can't believe it. Thank you first, Dr. Friedman, for joining us. Really appreciate the session. I think, I don't know if you saw the chat while you were talking, probably not, but tons of positive feedback and really, really interesting information. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. And thanks so much for inviting me. Have a great rest of the conference.
Thanks, Dr. Friedman.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys, next we have success stories. So when we were putting the conference together, a lot of you are like, I want to hear from people who have healed. What does it look like? I want positivity. I need encouragement. Show me some faces that have healed from this, right? So Michelle is going to lead a panel of TSW success stories. And this session is well, it's for the next 35 minutes, depending on your time zone, 35 minutes. And we do have a break coming up. It's going to be in 50 minutes. If you guys can hang in there, this will be really interesting.
Thanks, Jodie. What a wonderful deep dive into how TSW is explained from an Eastern medicine perspective. So thanks so much, Dr. Olivia. So our next session is going to be a really good one. It's called Life After TSW, our Success Stories panel. But before we begin, we'll have a poll. So do you consider yourself recovered from TSW? Yes, no, or for the most part? And if you don't see the poll, please let me know.
And you can answer for your child, just reminding the caregivers.
Awesome. All right, so while you do that, I'll start introducing our panelists. Our panelists are from around the world, the US, Singapore, and now the UK, and Australia, and they all have really unique experiences with TSW. I hope that them sharing about their journey and where they are at now will provide some hope for those who are in the thick of it. I know the healing stories always helped me, especially when I was going through a flare-up. And so I hope hearing these stories are going to help you as well. We have Lacy. Lacy's journey with her skin started over 30 years ago. She's at 5 years TSW now, and she's recovered, but still striving for the best health daily. We have Jing Ray. Jing is a TSW superstar. She has a website on TSW information and advocates for healing holistically with a focus on mental and emotional well-being. Her website is decodingtopicalsteroidwithdrawal.com. And then finally, we have Lewis. Lewis hails from Melbourne, Australia. So he's up late for this. So thank you very much. He's really overcome the ringer of TSW, which includes eczema herpeticum and infection. So I'm really, really excited to have them here. And without further ado, let's start the panel. The format is going to be first introductions. So Lacy will start with her introductions, and then it'll just be like a Q&A type of situation where we discuss different topics. If you have any specific questions, I'll try to address them from the Q&A. All right. So let me just unshare my screen so we can just chat. And let's have Lacy, Lewis, Jing, unmute yourselves.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining me today. We had a dry run a couple days ago, and made me all that more excited. So let's start with Lacy. Lacy, can you share with us a little bit more about your TSW journey and anything else you want to touch upon?
Yes, I'm really excited to be here and being a part of all of it. It's been 5 years for me in April, last April. And I'm from Northern California, and gosh, this brings up so much for me. You know, I've lived through it, and for me, my recovery is still every day. Even though I am what I feel like in remission, because I hesitate on saying that I'm healed from TSW. I've gone through a completely, healing journey and a process, but every day for me is with gratitude for where I've been and where I'm going. I still have stayed connected with a lot of the community, but there's so many people now that I don't know yet. And, but I do have, still a huge support system that I went through it with, that are, some of them are still going through it. So just really grateful is, I live in gratitude every day. And even when I have bad days now, nothing compares to what I went through. And I am, still every day that I go out into the world, and I'm a hairstylist, so I actually worked all the way through my worst times. And I have an amazing support system clientele that stuck with me and, just supported me, on top of my husband and my kids and my family and some of my closest friends. So there was a couple questions that Michelle asked, for me to answer in the intro. There's so much that I could say, and I wrote so much that, there's not just number one thing, or, so I'm going to try and stick to, what will help everybody, just, kind of understand where I'm at now. And, everybody can pretty much understand that's going through it or has gone through it, what we went through. What do I consider life after TSW? Because I do share a lot on social media. It took me months to actually get to that point when I was first going through it. My first year was devastating. And then just a little, backstory. I felt like at 2 years, I was coming out of the worst of it. My second year was definitely better than my first year. And then it took me in year 3 to not be so scared of going back. And as we know, some people do, recover and heal and clear and then go back into it. So it's never, ever, ever lost on me that could happen. But I'm very diligent about my mindset and what I do in my day-to-day life to, be prepared for that and hopefully not go back to that. But life after TSW for me is, like I said, living in an immense amount of gratitude and continuing to work on my inner self, what's inside, coming out. So loving myself, having a ton of self-love and forgiving myself for what I didn't know, and continuing to educate myself so that I can be better in the future. And for my children too, like showing them everything that I've gone through, so one more thing, looking back, what am I most proud of? This was a hard, there's not just one, what could I pinpoint? Most of what I've said, I'm very proud of myself for working through it, getting through it, being a hairstylist, being in an industry that is so focused on what's the outward, because, one of the things that I'm most proud of is loving the skin that I'm in at every stage. When I was in the thick of it, at the worst of it, looking at how terrible it was and not knowing when it would go away or when I would recover, just loving myself through that. So I don't want to take up too much time for everybody else's intros, but we'll talk more. So that's basically a bit of my story.
I love that, Lacy. Thanks so much for sharing. And I think we had similar timelines when we first started TSW. So seeing you come out of it has been so encouraging. Thanks. All right, Jing, tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Jing. I'm TSW Trooper on Instagram. I'm 28 this year and I'm from Singapore. Currently, I'm living in the UK. Woohoo! Well, I began TSW 10 years ago, and I know that's a very daunting number. So that is why I usually do not bring it up. But if I were to think back on how long I've actually been suffering from topical steroid addiction, that would actually be all my life. I had eczema since I was a baby, and I started applying topical steroids since I was an infant. And I think on and off throughout my life, I always had skin problems and only discovered what TSW was when I was 18. So that was when I began my withdrawal, and 10 years later, here I am. I would say my entire TSW journey was very up and down. There were periods of good skin. I could live my life pretty normally. And then in the recent years, I think like 3 or 4 years, did it get much worse when I started working as a social worker. And I think the stress of that got to me, along with the lack of knowledge of how to take care of my skin. So I applied lots of moisturizers, like too much, and that got me into like lots of hardened skin all over my body, lots of inflammation and hair loss, and all the symptoms that we already know. And I began to saw true healing in the past 2 years. When I finally met Dr. J, and that has helped me heal up quite a bit in the past 2 years. So now my skin is more, it's still quite flaky on my face and my neck, and also in my inner elbows. I discovered that, oh, seems like I'm having eczema now rather than TSW. Yeah, how would I describe life after TSW? I would say when your skin gets to the point of stability where you seldom flare up, or even if you do flare, you know how to take care of it and it doesn't cripple your life or impede your daily activities. I think healing is also like 50% mental health. So if you are mentally and spiritually healed or happy, that is like half the battle won. So I feel like if you, in your mind, if you are considering yourself healed, then you are healed. Even if you flare up, or even if you go through a difficult time, if you're able to manage that or handle that, then I would say you're still quite at peace. Yeah, what are the other questions?
I love that,
Looking
Jing.
back, what are you proud of yourself for? Well, you know what? It's like I'm so bad at speaking in front of everyone. So I do get a little bit nervous. Yeah, but yeah, looking back, what are you proud of yourself for? I'm proud of myself for just going through TSW for that long, to be honest. I think TSW is like just going through TSW is already a big feat for every one of us here. Just simply that no matter how much we did during TSW or how little we did, whatever methods that we use to survive in TSW, I feel like we should all give ourselves a pat on the back. To even attempt this is terrifying and painful. And I think that it takes a lot of courage to go through this, because it's like braving through a lot of pain to do something that you know is right for yourself, despite what everybody else is saying about your condition. So I'm proud of myself for just even sticking through it, and standing up for myself, I guess. And I think my proudest achievement is me, where I worked on myself. I built this person here today, and TSW helped me with that process. So yeah, I'm actually pretty grateful for my condition. I feel like it was meant to be, and yeah, without it, I wouldn't have me. I wouldn't have these wonderful people around me, including all of you guys. This wonderful relationship that I have with my family right now, it also healed because of TSW. Yeah, and also my purpose in life. So that's what I have to say for my introduction.
Amazing. Thank you, Jing. And I think this theme of mindset has come in through like Lacy and you as well. So that's so awesome to hear. Thanks, Jing. So last but not least, Lewis, my man, hailing from Melbourne. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I think you're probably a new face and a new friend.
Yeah, so I was not really on social media that much. I was on the Australian TSW pages a bit, but after what seems like a lifetime now of TSW, I kind of just had to take a break and just kind of go into hiding for a little bit because I was still healing and it was still taking quite a while to kind of make sense of everything. But let's just say there's light at the end of the tunnel now. Like Macy said, I don't really think I could ever be fully healed. Maybe TSW has given me trust issues with myself, or maybe it's just a good day is a good day and a bad day is a bad day, but where we were is completely different to where we are now. And my path to getting to understand TSW, to recognize what I had, was in fact an addiction to the steroids. It was very convoluted, like I'm sure a lot of you were. So growing up as a child, all during school, through school, I would go to specialists and dermatologists, and I'd get referrals from my GP because she wasn't that comfortable prescribing me steroids, but I'll get onto that later. And these doctors and these dermatologists would always, and these specialists would always just give me so many prescriptions for steroids, and they would just tell me it's the first point that we use to treat eczema, which now we know probably isn't a great thing to say. So yeah, I was working, it wasn't until 2013, so when I finished school, I was working with a bunch of raw vegan kind of influencer types who kind of convinced me about the risks of steroids, but they never actually mentioned the TSW things. It was just what the impact was. So that kind of had me a bit worried. So I remember withdrawing back then without knowing that I was kind of withdrawing. And so my skin, my health went into complete overdrive at this point. I was working in a really fast, busy retail environment. And I just thought it was because contact with everyone and it was quite stressful. So at this 2013, fast forward another year, I was back on the steroids. Another dermatologist had convinced me that it was the best treatment. It was the only way I would get on top of it. I went on prednisone, all of the ointments, everything. I was doing what I was told, yet I would stop and I would wake up and I'd be a lobster, or I'd have a red wine and I'd be heating up and things weren't right. I was becoming allergic to things I was never allergic to, and my sleeping wasn't very good, and I was starting to lose quite a lot of hair. So then fast forward a few more years, 2015, I was backpacking, I forgot my steroids. And a lot of people here is where they realize they have TSW. I was in the opposite boat because I spent my time on a boat. And I was swimming the whole time in salt water and sun. And my skin was actually really good being outside of Australia, which in the south where I am is really freezing and dry and Arctic cold chills. And it's bad for people with allergies. So it wasn't until I got back to Australia at this point that I realized that my skin really started blowing up again. And I went back on the steroids. I did what I was told. I was starting to flare on my neck and my chest and all this, and my wrists. So I was starting to get red sleeves at this point. And I remember it was about 2017, this very start of 2017, so I'm 5 years in now, where I just was Googling things like steroids not working, reacting after stopping steroids, things like that. And I came across something called TSW. And I'd never been more sure of something in my life. And I was reading a blog about it, and everything was aligning up perfectly. And it was the same story, being told to use steroids, being told that this is the right answer, and this is this, and this, you know, steroids will fix the problem, and, you know, we go on, live our lives, we're eczema free. And it wasn't the case at this point. You know, I wanted to go out, and I didn't want my skin to define and be the big barrier, whether it was eating food or drinking alcohol or going camping or going doing anything, I always had to worry about my skin. So I knew that wasn't right. I knew that wasn't how most adults lived, and things weren't really making sense. So I remember I told my doctor about, and this is where I'm really, really fortunate. I told my doctor about this thing that I read, which is called Topical Steroid Withdrawal. And she said, this is kind of incredible that you're telling me this, because when I was your age, I had to move to America, and I had to give up my steroids at the time. And I realized that my skin was addicted to steroids. So I think I know what this is. I mean, I don't know the medical term. I don't know the medical terminology for this, but I think I know what this is. And I think I've been through this also. So my doctor, throughout my whole experience, did not gaslight me or make me validate myself at all. Other specialists did. But it was great just to have someone not pushing steroids on me, not pushing anything on me, but just giving me blood tests, telling me whether it's an infection, whether it's okay, if she expects this to heal, if, it was someone to lean on when there's not really many people to lean on in situations like this. I was a slow burner, of course, so I withdrew, and it took 3-4 months until I really kind of blew up. And I kind of convinced myself that I would be one of the people that would be sick for a year, and then I'd get better again. But I would have my flare up, I would have a few good months, and then I'd be back at day one, and then I'd have that flare up, and then I'd go back to day one. And that happened every year for 4 or 5 years. So yeah, it was it's been a long 5 years, I guess you could say. What do I consider life after TSW? I think the lack of sleep when you're in the midst of it really messes with your body. So I think sleeping properly, being able to eat properly without reacting to foods, feeling human again, mentally, physically, spiritually, I think is probably the best way the best kind of way I would describe life after TSW, is just that feeling of normality that we had years before we were going through anything like this. Looking back, what am I proud of? It's interesting this, because I don't want to sound like a cliche where people say, oh, look back to where you were when you were 16 and look how far you've come and things like that. But I think just knowing that I got through the first year, and I got through that second year, I got through that third year, I got through that fourth year, I got through that fifth year, I got through eczema hepaticum, I got through, baldness and all the other stuff that goes along with TSW. I think it's really important to actually to recognize how far you have come. And I am, just like Jing said, I am really grateful to be able to be in this place now and have experienced this and have a bit more awareness and all that stuff. So yeah.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing, Lewis. I think all of you guys have such unique stories about how you guys came about TSW, what you guys experienced. And so I put out a poll earlier today asking whether or not you consider yourself recovered from TSW. And if we can just show the results and what that looks like, it looks like most of us here don't consider ourselves recovered from TSW. And it sounds like you guys all have similar definition, which isn't necessarily perfect skin perhaps, but another mindset, something post TSW. So I want to ask you guys, for those who are still in the thick of it, what advice do you have for the TSW warriors who are in the thick of it right now, who maybe just started 1 year in? What's your advice? And it's a free-for-all between the three of you. Lewis, Lacy, you want to start?
I'll speak a little bit on that. I definitely, the community is huge. And I ended up finding, kind of a group of women that I actually we have a group text that goes on the regular, and we all, have just supported each other. And, so definitely finding the positivity in it, because I know for me personally, some of the groups, I had to stop looking at for a while when I was in the thick of it, because the negativity, I mean, it's everybody's journey, and that it's such a struggle. So you have to be able to decipher for yourself what you can see and what you need to step away from seeing at the time. So I think finding, the right people for you during that journey, wherever it may be, because it does change, and hanging on to that, definitely.
Amazing. How about you, Jing? Do you have your favorite tip or what advice you have?
I think for people new to TSW, the first thing to do is to listen to yourself, and learn how to listen to your body. So I think when anyone is stepping into TSW, it's very confusing because there's tons of information out there. I mean, it was very different from when I first started TSW where there was no information. So now I think there's lots of information. Some are really conflicting, some are confusing, and you don't really understand yourself either because you're just new into this. So I think the best person to listen to is to yourself when you try out various therapies. Take a very scientific approach, almost as if you're detached from it, and don't attach too much meaning or emotion to when any therapy that you tried didn't work out. So I would say when you're trying anything new, just listen to how your body is reacting to it. If it doesn't feel right, no matter what other people say, just stop it. Or if it feels right, but everyone else is kind of like condemning it, then don't listen to them. Yeah, so your voice matters the most in TSW. And yeah, I think it's a skill to be learned, and a skill to hone so that it also helps with your mental health and your healing.
Amazing.
Yeah, I can just add to that. Like, we are also genetically unique, and people will come to me and ask what I did, and I can speak to exactly what I did and wish that would be healing for all, but there's no absolutes in it. And I agree with Jing 100%. The mindset and following your own intuition. I mean, I tried all different kinds of things in the first year, and I probably would still do the same thing again if I were starting over. But I also know that I'm a person that go back to basics, go back to what makes you feel the best and the most comfortable too, because it's about trying to be as comfortable as possible through it as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Jing and Lacy more on both those statements. So first I'll go to Jing's point, which is social media. Actually, no, which was your Lacy's point, which was social media. So I actually made a really good friend going through TSW. So she was 2 years already. She basically was at the end. She saw light in the tunnel when I was starting. So we would get coffee when I first started going through, and she would tell me, no, this is normal, this is normal, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine. And we still see each other basically every week now. And now we just have sick jokes between the pair of us about everything we went through. And the other point is detaching from everything, I think was a great point, because on the pages, there's information overload, and we already have information overload in everyday life. And I think when you take you look at TSW for what it is and the scientific basis of it, it's much healthier. Otherwise, I've seen, and I experienced this myself, especially in my first year, you can get quite neurotic, quite irrational, trying to find answers and trying to fix yourself because this is so absurd and it doesn't make sense and we were doing what we were told. And I think if we take a viewpoint where we try to just understand the science and we understand what's in our control and what isn't in our control, we'll be in much better places. And the other point I want to make is it's really absurd, but I think we just have to accept it for what it is. So I had my first year, which was bad. I had to stop working. I was incapacitated at home, basically. My parents became my arms for me. They did everything for me. And so the second year comes around and start flaring, and I'm back to, day one. But I don't have the opportunity to just stop what I'm doing this time. And I still went out, I still ordered the coffee that made me happy. I read that it can cause flares, or I still would, see friends in public. I would still get the train to work and the tram to work. And I know people would ask me to my face, what's wrong with me? And they would point at me and things like that. But I think what TSW really teaches you is to be less concerned of everything else around you and just focus on yourself. And I think it's a really good idea to just accept it for what it is. And nothing we're going to do is going to fix the problem right now. It's a process.
Wow, I feel like I'm learning a lot. Like that, the mindset, it's coming up and it's so important. And it sounds like a skill that you guys are taking moving forward in life. So it's almost like, the silver lining to TSW, as harsh as that is. But with that being said, life for you guys, how has life post TSW been? Like, have you taken things from TSW moving forward? Are you guys leaving TSW behind and you trying not to think about it? What does it look like for you? And what are you guys up to? Lewis, let's start with, Lacy.
Sorry. I know for me, so because I've had, a good solid 2 years now beyond, and I'm obviously so grateful for that. And I still have stayed, like I said, in touch with my friends that are still going through it at different stages and on social media. But, just living life, chasing joy, knowing that what I went through is, was life-changing, and for me, helping others when I was going through it, even still talking to others going through it and helping them and lifting them up and building them up. And, I had before I got sick, I had a mindset of coaching and wellness. And I grew up with my family being very much not about, medicating all the things. And so that was my mindset. The fact that I used what I did for the number of years that I did, it was kind of odd for my lifestyle, but I did it. And that, again, is what I had to forgive myself for, because we all just do what we can to what we think we should do. So, life now is still a journey.
How about you, Jing? How does life after TSW look for you?
Well, it's looking very good. I'm very, very happy right now. It's the most carefree I ever felt. I think before or during TSW, all my life, I've always been quite insecure, very quiet. I don't dare to stand out. I don't dare to express any of my needs or wants. And now I just feel very assured in myself. And that gives me that freedom, or that feeling of freedom. And I think this is so important because it applies to every aspect of your life, not just in your personal life where you communicate your needs more effectively, and you do your daily tasks more calmly, and without feeling like there's this like scarcity mindset or anxiety. So I just feel much more at peace. I enjoy every moment much more right now. I'm able to be a bit more mindful in my daily life. So it's kind of like I know how to smell the roses now when I take a walk, instead of walking really fast and thinking I'm getting ahead, but actually I'm walking to nowhere. And right now, and I'm setting up a clinic for TSW together with Louise in the UK. And I just feel like this has become my life purpose. I feel like many people are afraid to lean into TSW because it is scary and it's not something that we really want to identify with. But the more that we lean into it and accept it, like how Louise has said, the more you are able to overcome it, ironically. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Jing. And Louis, before we go, you let us know how life after TSW is for you.
Interesting question. Some things I care a lot more about, and some things I care a lot less about. So yes, I'm definitely more carefree and accepting. I feel a lot more happy-go-lucky. I have zero qualms about vanity. I never cared that much before, but after this, I just think it's such a non-important thing when we're healthy and well, and I think being fortunate to be from a place where I've got healthcare and things like that, and I've got the support I need, I think it's great to just take every day for what it is. And I think society sets this agenda that when we go through an event like this, we should be seeing daisies and roses and singing to the sound of music outside in the paddock. But at the same time, it's not all positive. At the same time, I do kind of feel quite disenfranchised about what has happened during TSW, because my job isn't the job I wanted, and the path that I was going down has now twisted and turned and things like that. So I'm a bit more bitter, maybe. But it's also given me an opportunity to reassess what I want out of life, like Jing was saying. So I'm able to study social impact instead of business and things like that. So I kind of want to add back to society rather than take now, just knowing how important an individual is and how little an individual is at the same time. It's given me a lot more perspective.
That's amazing.
That's a weird answer, but
I appreciate it because it's not that simple, I think, at the end of the day. But thank you, Lacy. Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Jing, for joining us today. I think just the conversations about what you guys went through and how you guys are now is going to give a lot of people hope. So thank you for your time and thank you for staying up. It's time for a next session before somebody from the ITSAN team boots me out. So we'll talk to you guys later.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I just want to say thank you for all of those great insights. I was looking at the chat during, and it was just really resonating. I know when I was in the thick of it, it really helped to hear other people who are farther along the path or on the other side. In fact, there are a handful of blogs I just clung to, and I probably read over and over, and it really meant a lot to me. And so thank you so much to that panel for sharing your insights and your hope, and just, that this is normal and this too shall pass. So anyway, thank you so much for that. So our next session is kind of on the Western medicine side of things with Dr. Belinda Sheary. It's like Topical Steroid Withdrawal 101. Before we begin, I wanted to put our poll up if we could. So the first question is, did you struggle to find a TSW supportive medical doctor? And the second question is, do you currently have a TSW supportive medical doctor? So you just take a second to answer that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read Dr. Sheary's intro so you learn a little bit about her. Okay. So Dr. Sheary is a general practitioner from the Royal Randwick Medical Centre in New South Wales, Australia. She has published multiple papers on topical steroid addiction, topical steroid withdrawal. Her papers include, sorry, I'm answering my own poll. Let's see. Okay, so I can get that off my screen. Okay. Her papers include case studies on children, a guide for GPs, on TSW symptoms and a longitudinal study following 24 adults experiencing TSW for 2 years. I think personally that one's golden, where you follow people for 2 years and just see what happens and report it. Her dedication to publishing on TSW and to creating guidelines for doctors to treat TSW patients has been invaluable to the TSW community. So Dr. Sheary is not able to be here with us as she lives in Australia, and it's from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Australia time, but she graciously sent us a recording of her presentation, and we're really happy to share that with you now. And when it's over, we'll share the results of our poll, and then we're going to have our first break. So Michelle, if you would, take it away and share her presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Belinda Sheary and I'm a general practitioner in Sydney, Australia. I have a special interest in TSW and have been seeing patients in my practice with this condition since 2015. I've also researched TSW and published a few papers on the topic in the last few years. Let's start by talking about TSW definitions. There isn't a whole lot in the literature about TSW because it's poorly acknowledged, but there are now 2 systematic reviews. The first was published in 2015 and the most recent one earlier this year. They both came to very similar conclusions. For those that might not know, a systematic review is a study where the researchers look at all the previous papers published on a topic and basically summarise the data. With TSW, this unfortunately creates a problem as patients from very different populations are lumped together, leading to conclusions that are not necessarily applicable to many TSW patients. So in the most recent review, the authors stated, TSW usually occurs after prolonged use of moderate to high intensity topical steroid usage, usually on the face. It is most common in women and many patients present due to improper use, such as for cosmetic reasons. Symptoms include erythema, itchiness and burning. Secondary lesions are commonly scales. I've highlighted in red there the words that make this definition inappropriate for the patients that I see. And here you can see why this conclusion is not applicable to patients in Western countries. The systematic review examined a total of 11 studies on TSW from 2016 to 2020, which included a total of 394 patients. However, 316 patients were from a single study in India, where 83% of the patients were female, and every patient had used topical steroids for cosmetic purposes. The patients I see have all been prescribed topical steroids, and they almost always have eczema as their original skin diagnosis. So they are a very different group of people to those described in this Indian study. I believe our definition of TSW needs to acknowledge the 2 very different TSW populations, those that have misused topical steroids for cosmetic purposes and those who have been prescribed topical steroids. I define TSW as a potential adverse effect of topical steroid overuse, typically seen in patients who report having used increasing amounts and/or potencies of topical steroids over time. Where topical steroids have been prescribed, it's most often seen in patients with atopic dermatitis or eczema. In parts of Asia and Africa, TSW is more commonly seen in women who have misused topical steroids for skin lightening. After stopping their use of topical steroids, affected patients develop new features that are not associated with their original skin condition. What is actually happening to the skin in TSW? Unfortunately, as you might expect for a condition which is poorly recognised, there's been very little research into the mechanisms of TSW symptoms. Here are 3 papers that have looked at it. The first paper here was published in 1991, and they found that patients stopping long-term topical steroid use had reduced water content in the top layer of the skin. This can explain the scaling, peeling skin, and the dryness. In 2006, Marvin Rappaport published this paper where he studied the role of nitric oxide causing blood vessels to dilate excessively in TSW, which explains the red skin and the swelling seen. Moto Fukaya found prolonged use of topical steroids probably suppresses the skin's production of cortisol, and so when a person who has used topical steroids long-term stops using them, they have a relative cortisol insufficiency, which would lead to some of the TSW symptoms. When I first meet a patient concerned about TSW, Usually the first question they will ask me is whether I think they have TSW. The answer isn't straightforward because there are no diagnostic criteria for TSW. In this paper I wrote in 2018, I proposed some diagnostic criteria, and I'd like to go through those with you now. I suggested we should consider topical steroid withdrawal when the following essential criteria are fulfilled, the diagnosis becoming more likely when more of the key diagnostic criteria are also present. So the essential criteria for a typical case of TSW, you'll see a history of long-term regular topical steroid use, so months to years, where the topical steroids were initially effective, but over time either increased amounts or potencies or both were required to reduce the severity of skin symptoms. Itch. Occasionally itch is mild, but I find it's always present, and often it is very severe. The erythema or the redness, so this is the widespread red skin, the spreading areas of redness. Key diagnostic criteria. So the first three here cover the history. So a history of atopy, especially atopic dermatitis, is extremely common. Asthma and hay fever are also common, as is a history of food allergies. A history of using topical steroids to the face, especially potent topical steroids, is common. A history of using oral prednisone for skin symptoms is far more commonly seen in the TSW population compared to the general eczema population. Burning pain is classic. Skin sensitivity to previously tolerated skin products can be seen, as can a sensitivity to water, so people may choose to limit their bathing or showering for a time. Excessive skin peeling, so the shedding, oozing skin, the swelling, the elephant wrinkles, and the red sleeve sign. Here you can see the thickened skin with reduced skin elasticity to the backs of the elbows and the knees there. With the red sleeve, you can see the redness to the arms ending abruptly at the wrist, and you have a very sharp demarcation between the clear skin of the palms and the red skin there of the forearms. On the side of the hand here, you've got the redness here ending very abruptly and the clear skin on the side of the hand. This patient demonstrates the diffuse redness of skin, the swelling of the ankle, and the sharp demarcation between the affected and unaffected skin. This patient demonstrates the scaling skin, again a very sharp demarcation between the affected skin and the clear skin. This patient is Asian and he has more of a brown discoloration to his skin, but still a very sharp demarcation between the clear skin and the affected skin. This patient has a papular-pustular version of TSW at this point, and you can see her lesions end very abruptly there on the side of the foot. Additional supporting features which may be present in TSW. Sleep disturbance and mood disturbance are extremely common. Skin pain other than burning pain, so this includes all the nerve pain that some people experience. Papules and pustules, so this is the little skin bumps and pus spots that some people develop. The headlight sign, so this is where you have the red face with the clear skin to the nose. It's not specific for TSW, it was actually first described in eczema. Management of TSW. There's no specific management of TSW, and so we're focusing on symptom management, supportive care, and monitoring for complications. For lifestyle measures, many patients will try the ice and cool compresses for their burning pain. Loose cotton clothing might be worn due to the sensitive sore skin. Bandages and non-stick dressings might be used for the oozing areas. I put in brackets there moisturising. Patients will often find moisturising helpful in the early stages, but many prefer to stop using them a few months in. I've included diet, not because there's any particular diet that will help with skin healing, but rather that anecdotally many patients have reported to me their skin symptoms flare if they start eating a lot of junk food, fast food, and drinking alcohol. So a healthy diet's always a good idea. Sunlight is often helpful in the later stages of TSW, and presumably this works somewhat in the same way as the light therapy I've mentioned further down. With over-the-counter medications, many people will try antihistamines for itch and paracetamol and ibuprofen for pain. With prescription medications from your GP, patients sometimes want to try sleeping pills, though they don't seem to be particularly effective when symptoms are severe. Gabapentin has been described in the literature for burning pain, and some patients might want to try prescription painkillers. But of course, these medications are for short-term use only. From a dermatologist or immunologist, patients might try cyclosporin or a similar oral immunosuppressant. Light therapy may help a bit. And Peter Leo has published a small case series of TSW patients who benefited from dupilumab, so that might also be an option for some people. Mental health, of course, is a huge issue in both TSW and severe eczema, and some patients might benefit from seeing a psychologist or trialling antidepressants. I thought I'd include some self-management strategies here from a qualitative study I published earlier this year. You can see there's a wide variety of activities people try. These are responses from just 19 people. The second question people seeing me about TSW usually ask is, how long will my symptoms last? This was something that interested me, so I designed this study a few years back and followed around 20 participants for 2 years to see how they got on. Unfortunately, the answer was it varies and it's complicated. So in this 2-year study, I had approximately 20 participants fill in questionnaires at 7 points in time, and this included the Dermatology Life Quality Index. This is a series of 10 questions. If the patient scores low, so 0 to 1, it suggests their skin symptoms have no effect on their life. And if they score between 21 and 30, so 30 being the maximum score, it suggests their skin symptoms have an extremely large effect on their life. If you look over here at the average DLQI scores, you can see that they do come down consistently over the 2-year period. However, if you look over here at the ranges, you can see that they're really very large. And even here at the 2-year mark, we have 6 of the 19 participants who report their skin symptoms have no effect on their life. You still have 3 of the 19 participants who report their skin symptoms have a very large effect on their life. So I went back and looked at the scores of these participants earlier on in the study, and they were in fact significantly lower. So this suggests that these 3 participants were experiencing a flare of their symptoms at the 2-year mark. So unfortunately, you can't provide a clear picture to someone stopping long-term topical steroid use as to how they're likely to be at any one point in time, because as I've said here in the heading, it varies and it's complicated. Which brings me to the next point that I wanted to make. A very large proportion of people who stop using topical steroids due to TSW concerns do go back to using them again. From my research, with admittedly small numbers, this seems to be around 30%, but I actually wonder if it might even be higher. There are people who resume using topical steroids within days, others within months, and I've met a number of patients now who have even restarted using topical steroids over 2 years after stopping. And these are patients who had a very difficult TSW symptoms initially, went on to have a period of relatively clear skin and with minimal symptoms, but unfortunately they experienced a flare of their symptoms. So this is a very difficult condition to manage. Some patients, of course, do decide to stop using topical steroids again. Seeking healthcare. If you're going to go to see your general practitioner about your skin and want to broach the topic of TSW, here are some resources you might like to print out and take with you. The first one here is an overview of the condition I wrote a few years back, and the one on the right is quite a recent one, so January 2021, put out by the National Eczema Society and the British Association of Dermatologists. And just a reminder, if you've been through TSW and are trying to avoid steroids unless absolutely necessary, they're not just prescribed for skin symptoms. Here are some doctors who may prescribe steroids in the form of tablets, injections, puffers, nasal sprays, eye drops, etc. Sometimes, of course, steroids are prescribed for very serious conditions and they can be life-saving, so avoiding them might not be possible. But in some circumstances, you might be able to avoid, say, a steroid injection for a painful joint or for a tooth extraction. So if you are in the position to ask about options, this is worth doing. But again, steroids can be life-saving and sometimes there really isn't a choice. Here are my references. Thank you for listening.
So we're really grateful that Dr. Sheary took the time to share that with us, and she gave some great resources. So if you have some questions for her, you can put it in the chat and we can forward it to her later. Amy, if you would bring up the answer to our poll that we did at the top. So it looks like 95% of you did struggle to find a TSW supportive medical doctor, and only 23% currently have a TSW, supportive medical doctor. So this is really actually important information for us to have as we're taking this into the various places where we're trying to create change. And this is a needed thing for our community. We need to be able to see doctors who are supportive. So thank you for participating in that poll. So we're going to move on to our break. Please come back because the second half is packed with awesome information. We went a bit over time, so just come back at 10 after the hour, whatever hour you are in, and we will see you then.
All right, it's 10 after. I hope everyone had an awesome break. I went outside and got some sunshine. Sorry for those of you in the other side of the world where it's the middle of the night, but we can go ahead and get started on our next session. So Kelly and I will talk today about advocacy and what that really means. This is actually how I got pulled into ITSAN. I think I mentioned earlier that I had that middle of the night epiphany that no one was talking to the doctors to let them know this was happening. So we'll talk today. We've only got about 20 minutes, so it'll be a super quick conversation. But Kelly and I decided that we would be happy to sort of dive in a little bit deeper on June 5th. It'll be in a couple of weekends. So hopefully you can join us there. So we'll talk about the steps to affect change. One key thing to keep in mind is the prevalence of TSW. This is something that tends to come up frequently in advocacy, people trying to understand how prevalent or rare it is. We'll define the problem. We'll talk briefly about the advocacy toolkit and where to start and what grassroots advocacy looks like. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have the follow-up webinar on June 5th. You guys can all see my screen, okay? Okay. So, I think we all know that anyone can make a difference. It's just a matter of who's going to do it, who's going to step up and make change happen. So you guys might recognize the wonderful person here on the right in the image, Brianna Banyas. I know she was on earlier. Hopefully you're still joining us, Brianna. She's the one that put together the awesome Preventable documentary. And here she was at some conference. I don't remember which one this was. Chicago, maybe? I didn't attend that one.
This is the investigative dermatology conference that she and I went to in Florida.
Perfect. Oh, Florida. Okay. Awesome. So it's as easy as that. Coming to a conference, representing ITSAN, telling your story, essentially documenting your story. These are key parts of making a difference. And
I'd just like to jump in here. Can we go back a slide, Jodie?
Yeah.
A lot of times people say, why don't my doctors know about this? Why isn't change happening? How come, we're not getting the support that we need? And a lot of times it's good to take a step back and realize that there's certain steps that have to take place before your doctor is actually going to be aware of topical steroid withdrawal, before they're willing to treat it. Just because if they've been educated differently, if they don't see any scientific data to back it up, it's very hard for them to just change that mindset. So as we worked together with ITSAN, we get a lot of questions, and we just kind of wanted to highlight, what are some of the steps that have to take place for this tide to change, and for everyone to acknowledge this as a household word, not just the general public, but physicians as well, so that we're getting the support that we need, and so that this doesn't keep on happening. So obviously the steps here are general awareness. So if you're talking to your friends and family, we need to be talking to our doctors and the general public, but we also need to get data to support all of the anecdotal stories that we're bringing to the table. So a lot of times people can say, well, that's just an anomaly. That's just you, or maybe that's just worsening eczema. You don't know what you're talking about. It's so important to have that scientific data, which is one of the reasons it's so important to get involved in research and surveys. But then we also need to get a diagnostic code so that doctors can actually diagnose this and send these things to insurance companies so people can get their insurance. That's super important, diagnostic code. But just like Dr. Sheary was saying, we still don't even have the criteria completely defined yet. So these are all steps that we're working toward. Once we get that code, then people can actually be diagnosed, they can be covered. We need a public health advisory to physicians and patients issued by FDA, our regulating agency, and other regulating agencies around the world, so that physicians are aware of it and people are aware of it. We need the product label changes on the steroids themselves so that when people are looking at it, they can realize, okay, you know, this isn't right. It says to use 2 to 4 weeks, but yet I'm being prescribed this for 10, 20, 50 years, you know, and there's no warnings on it. If the warnings are there, if there's better guidelines, then we actually can show our doctors, okay, this is incorrect. And they can go and reference it as well, right? But because it's so ambiguous, there's a real problem there. And then obviously physician education. So just wanted to place for the whole system to change. It's going to take a little while, but all of these things play a part in that. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. How can you get involved to start making that change?
Thank you, Kelly. Part of that is the prevalence. In fact, Kelly, you have a story about that when you were asked, I think it was from a Georgia legislator trying to understand what the prevalence is and telling you that you had to at least have some sort of idea about prevalence before you could affect any real change.
Right. And this is an easy way for anyone to figure out prevalence. If you're going to your state, your province, your country, you look at the overall number of people. So here in the US, we have 300 million people. We know that at least 10%, 10.1%, according to National Eczema Association, are diagnosed with eczema. So that means that's 30 million people. There's a Dr. Fukaya, who was referenced by Dr. Sheary, who's done some studies on prevalence of the addiction and withdrawal of topical steroids. He believes it's anywhere from 7 to 12%. So a rough estimate, but again, would be 10%. So if we take 10% of that 30 million people, we could guess that around 3 million people in the US alone could be dealing with topical steroid addiction and an ensuing withdrawal. So this is really important when we are legislators and let them know, hey, this is a growing problem. You need to be aware of this.
What's the number from Dr. Fukaya, right, out of Japan?
Correct.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the incidents of TSW. Kelly, if you can share this as well.
Yes. So guys, you are honored to be the first to look at the survey data out of everyone that we just finalized this report, and we're going to start publishing on it. So we only can share a couple of different slides with you, but this was the survey that we ran earlier this year, and just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who took the time, because it was lengthy, to fill this out, because like I said, we need the data in order to go and make changes. This is the kind of data that we have needed to have. So we had 2,160 people fill this out. 79% of them went through TSW, which is shocking to anybody that we show this to, because most people say, oh, this is rare, this isn't really happening. It's very clear that this is happening to a lot of people. And we're showing them these slides of, these are all of the different symptoms that people are experiencing and how many people are experiencing. The thing that always gets me is this last one here on the thoughts of suicide. 47% of those who filled out the survey of adults, 11% of children, who, you know, their parents may not even know. So that number is probably smaller, but these people are wondering, is it even worth living anymore? Because the suffering is so horrific. And I know just a couple of weeks ago, I had someone reach out to me who lived in California and just said, I feel like maybe my time's done. Like I'm only 3 months into TSW. I don't know if I could make it for years. I'm looking in these groups and I can't do that. So this is such a huge, huge issue that, you know, we don't need to just advocate for ourselves. We need to advocate for the thousands and perhaps millions of people who are in the same position that need someone to stand up and make change for them. So I think there's one more slide with the survey, Jodie, if you want to move ahead. Okay, so this is another really interesting thing that we were trying to define, is that steroid use in patients is not being tracked. We all know how there's no real measurable limit for topical steroids in the first place, so no one really knows how the steroid people are absorbing into their systems. But if you look at this, 100% of the people who took the survey are taking for their eczema or something else. If you look at the steroid load limit that has been determined for oral steroids, if you take over a gram over your entire lifetime, you are set up for adverse long-term results. So then when we look over here to the right in this blue box, look at all the different steroids that our respondents were taking at the same time, 91% on topicals. On top of that are orals, inhaled, nasal, eye, nebulized, injectable, ear. So it's so important that this message gets out. And in fact, this survey was the first of its kind. This has never been done within any disease state. So this is really, really huge. What we're uncovering is that patients need to be tracked. They need better options. They need to be informed. We need to have coordinated care in the healthcare system. I know here in the US, it's very disjointed. So this is a really big problem. There's a lot to unpack here and talk about, but we're just going to scratch the surface on Jodie and I. And so we want to show you now how you can get involved.
But Kelly, just real quick, does this study also document what long-term side effects are?
Correct. Yes, we did. We looked at multiple steroid use and the length of use, and then any correlated conditions that people have developed over time. So if you took the survey, you remember that you documented what your eczema was like when you were diagnosed as a child, most people, what it was like at its worst, if you went through TSW, and what does it look like in the last 30 days. And then we combine all the different treatments people use. There's just like a huge amount of data that we can go in and mine from this survey. But yeah, it will show, and it's very, very clear when you look at all the percentages. People using multiple steroids, people using steroids over time have a much higher rate of developing depression, anxiety, allergies, asthma. The list goes on.
And it's not just skin. It's truly, I mean, there's huge impacts on the bones, on the tendons. I mean, it really runs the gamut, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Eye problems.
Yes.
This is fantastic. I really hope this is going to be the basis for a lot of change going forward. So thank you so much, Kelly, for working on this.
Yeah, Kathy and I developed this. It was a work of love over months. It took a long time to develop it, but this is what we're hoping to bring to the FDA to show them what's actually happening. And a lot of the world looks to the FDA as far as how they regulate drugs. So this is really monumental. We're crossing our fingers we get this meeting with them in the fall.
So speaking of the FDA, the advocacy toolkit, I don't think it's right now for some reason in the files section of the ITSAN Facebook group. It has been before. I am updating it, and I'll get that back in there as soon as possible. But I think the key thing for today, if there's one thing to take from this session that we can all do, it's to report your experience to the FDA. There's literally nothing more impactful than that first step. And it takes you 5-10 minutes at home. You just need to kind of put together all the medications you use. It is a bit tedious because especially if you use, 5 different types of medications and, different parts of the body at different periods over the years. But if you can fill that out the very best that you can, that is making your data, your experience, it's turning that into a data point. And that's the only thing that's going to change prescription habits from these physicians, right? So there is, I'm hoping we can post that actually. The link, yes, thank you, Kathy, for putting that into the chat. There's, did someone say report to the FDA? So Catherine just put that into the chat. You can keep that, that link and fill that in later this afternoon, maybe right after the conference. But if you can do that one thing before we meet again on June 5th to talk about some other elements that you can take, that would be a fantastic win. So the advocacy toolkit, this is the thing I dreamt up in the middle of the night. I just got so angry. I can remember the moment sitting there. It's like 2 a.m. Everyone else in the house is sleeping. It's super quiet. And I'm like looking for ice and just itching. And I'm like, this is outrageous. It's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable, And I had a fairly mild, if you want to call it that, case of TSW. I was never bedridden. I didn't have to quit my job. But I was completely and utterly miserable. And that's why I got involved with ITSAN, because I cannot stand the thought of a whole pipeline of people really coming behind us. There's no reason for it, right? We just need to change the prescription habits of physicians and give them other options and let them understand what the outcome is of extended, repeated steroid use. So in this kit, I have written a I like to call it unemotional. We can't get angry. We can't make change happen many times with just pure emotion. So it's got to be informative. It's got to be very matter of fact, letter to the doctor. Obviously, you would need to change the elements in that template for your own situation, but there is a letter in there that you can send to all of your doctors to let them know, hey, this is my experience. This is what I believe to be happening. Here's third-party validation and research, because these physicians absolutely 100% respect peer-reviewed research. That's all they care about. What kind of studies back up this claim? So there's information in there about that. Kelly contributed the letter to your legislators, if you want to, or legislator, if you want to cover that part, Kelly.
Yeah, I'll talk about it in our grassroots part, Jodie, just because we have to move along. Yeah.
Sure. There's also a PowerPoint presentation that I think all of us at ITSAN have used in one way or another, that really talks about TSW. It's got data points in there. It's got pictures. It's a really powerful way to at least start telling your story. You can adapt that as well to reflect your own thoughts. But it's a starting point. So if you wanted to contact your local dermatology college, you can ask them for some time from a patient's perspective. They're often listening more to patients now than they ever have before. So I think that's a strong way to sort of advocate in your local community. We also have brochures. There's one available on the ITSAN website. I believe we're updating that, but it's a PDF that you can download. I still use it, take it to the doctor's office as well. And then we put together a whole book of patient stories. That's the image over there on the left. We use that at conferences to show doctors stopping by the table what TSW looks like. What is this patient story and this patient story? And I think we've got 75 to 80 of those stories gathered. And we'd love to add some more. We'd love for you to contribute your own story in this template. It makes it much easier for them to actually see with their own eyes what TSW looks like, what the patient looked like before and after steroids. We would like to, if we can get additional funding and time, especially now that we've got a data scientist on the board, we'd love to get a patient registry going. There is a lot that goes into a patient registry. It's not just an Excel spreadsheet. It's pretty elaborate, and we're all volunteers. We're trying to learn this the best we can. So if anybody in the group actually has experience with a patient registry, please let us know. But that is something that we would like to get going as well. And then we'll spend additional time on the grassroots advocacy. Oh, maybe I should start. Yes. So this is what the page looks like. You'll know you have arrived at the right page if you see this MedWatch online volunteer reporting form. There's a link down there on the right. So homework, everybody, between now and June 5th. If you haven't already, please report your experience to the FDA. By the way, this is a global ask. You do not have to be a US citizen to report to the FDA. And in fact, many organizations globally will look to the FDA for guidance and sort of a template on how to handle in their own country. So all of us can fill this out.
And I believe we were going to run a poll right now just to see how many people have filled out the FDA.
Oh, yes, let's do that. Thank you, Kelly.
Ta-da. And so this will be also very helpful when we get that meeting with the FDA. If we have, 10,000 people who've made a report, having that behind us when we bring the survey and our stories and have this, that's going to help a lot to back up what we're saying. So, all right, let's move on.
Do we have the poll results, or do you want to give it another minute? Okay, I guess we have, okay. All right, so 13% of us have already reported to the FDA or your country's equivalent. See, this is good homework for this group, right? 87%. So I don't know what number that'll be, maybe around 85, 90 people can report to the FDA today, maybe? Before June 5th. Okay, so let's spend the rest of the time we have on grassroots advocacy. And actually, I learned a couple of things in prepping for this session with Kelly this week. So I'm really excited for her to talk to you about this.
And like Jodie mentioned, this is a very high level overview because this is a whole webinar that we could talk about these things. My main point that I want to bring to you today is that your story and your experience can not only change your local community, it can change your state, your province, your country. It can eventually change the world if you are willing to show up. And I'm going to give you a tiny little backstory myself. When I was going through TSW, it was really severe. Like I had mentioned, I was bedridden a year and a half. When I finally started to be able to move around a little bit and thinking, you know, what is going to change this? The only thought that I had was like a lawsuit, right? Because if these companies feel it financially, then they'll change the labels. And I got a meeting with a lawyer and she told me, well, you're past the statute of limitation because you need to, you know, report it within a year, which I'm like, wow, well, that was not going to happen. I was bedridden. So she said, you know, I could, you know, get you a meeting with the FDA, but this is what you would need to have beforehand. All of those steps that I outlined earlier, those are some of the things we need to have beforehand. You need to have a large cohort of people. You need to have data. You need doctors behind you. You know, you need to have a good nonprofit organization with a strong board. And so she outlined all these things and she said, 5-10 years from now, this could all change. And I walked away from that meeting like, oh, never mind. You know, I don't want this to be my life. All I wanted was to get through the madness of this and just get on with what I thought my happy future was going to be. But because it lasted so long, I started to feel a sense of obligation, like, okay, this is not all right. I can't just be okay myself and move on with life. There are thousands and perhaps millions of people who were suffering like I was. And so one by one, I started having conversations with people. Certain doors started opening. And before I knew it, I was just like dumped into the world of advocacy. I had never, ever been involved in anything that had to do with policy. So I'm just letting you know, kind of like the movie Ratatouille, anyone can cook, anyone can be an advocate. So when I first found out, you know, who my elected officials were, that's the first step. And like Jodie said, we can do one thing today, report to the FDA. Another thing that you can do that's very simple, and I can put link afterward, look up who your elected officials are and reach out to them and start developing a relationship with them. They are there to serve you and to serve those things that are important to you. And if they don't know about them, how are they ever going to stand up and make laws and decisions that are going to affect you in a good way? So like I said, I made those first connections, met with my senator, who I met him in his place of work, which is in a little insurance agency. And he told me, Kelly, you'd be surprised at how little people get involved in the process. And in the US and in some of our other democratic nations, that is how things are supposed to work. The people are supposed to be driving what's happening. And with policy, so many of us feel like we can't make a change. It doesn't matter what I say. Well, yes, it does. So that's the first step, is connecting with them. They're a human being like your neighbor. They want to hear from you. They're there to serve you. Once you have that conversation, they get to know your story. Then you start developing ways to help the other people that are affected, like you. Like we were looking at the prevalence. And so my lawmakers started telling me, you know, that there's an advocacy boot camp you can check out and you can learn more. And there are health coalitions here in the state of Georgia that you can get involved with. And so there's power in numbers. And when I heard from, when I went to this boot camp, they were saying, you know, if one person reaches out to their legislator, you may or may not get a response back. If 10 people reach out with the same ask, okay, now we're paying attention. If 30 do, it's like, okay, what's going on? If 100 people reach out, it's a game changer. So it is all about who's going to show up. That's half the battle, is just showing up. And here I am, this picture of me testifying to a subcommittee in the Senate Health. That was so terrifying for me. I was shaking in my pants, telling my story. There was like 100 people in the room. It was standing room only. But at the time I thought, you know, with the Kelly right now, no, actually, with the Kelly in bed a year or 2 or 3 ago or whatever, when I was completely debilitated, I couldn't even roll on my side. Would that Kelly want the Kelly here now today to speak up and tell her story? Even if I was having trouble putting it in context, even if I knew nothing about this legislative process, would she want that? Absolutely, 100% yes. And so I don't do it just for the Kelly, you know, back years ago. I do it for the people I'm continually talking to who are suffering so much, who don't know if they want to live anymore. This has to change, and someone needs to get up and tell the story. So there are different ways that you can get involved. Like we outlined in the advocacy kit. I don't know if we have it in the next slide, Jodie, or if this is it. But there are ways in advocacy. If you're bedbound and you can't have a meeting with anyone, you can't even have a conversation with anyone, you can send an email. You can, make a phone call. If you're up for it, you can have an in-person meeting, and you never know where this is all going to lead. And right now, we don't have a specific ask around TSW, but I will say, if you start developing those relationships now, they get to know you and know your story. When we have that ask, like after we've gone to the FDA, after we have some like big, heavy backing, sometimes if the health community is not listening to us, we have to go to the next point of authority, right? So another thing that I found in this boot camp, it was the advanced nurse practitioners here in the state of Georgia were trying to practice medicine in rural areas where there were no doctors, and women were having to go 200 miles to have a baby in a hospital. It's just ridiculous. So these nurses were trying to get authority to be able to prescribe and to treat patients, but the doctors kept on stonewalling them. They couldn't get paid, wouldn't allow it. So these nurses decided they're going to go to the lawmakers and tell them their story. And guess what? They were able to do that. Now they can practice like that here in the state of Georgia. It's the same for us. If we go to our doctors and continually get pushed back, we can't make any progress. We need physicians to understand these things. This is something we can do when we go to legislators, mandating physician awareness or education, things like that. That's how we can change things. So again, we want to do a webinar that helps you with the process, and we will hold your hands through that. We understand if you've never done it before, it can feel intimidating or scary, but it really isn't. Anybody can do this. So that's my spiel for today. We hope
love your spiel.
Thank you.
Kelly is one of my personal heroes. Amazing story, amazing progress, and it's really just incredible. We do have 3 or 4 minutes if there's any Q&A. We hadn't exactly planned to do Q&A for this necessarily, but we'd be happy to take a couple of questions if anyone has any.
I do want to just mention too, I realize that this is different in different countries, but all you have to do is ask yourself, who are the leaders? Who are the people who can make a change in my country? If it's not my doctors, then who is it? And just reach out to them. You have to realize that all of these people are human beings. And when you reach them with your story, it's human to human, don't look at them like as a robot, person. That's how I always did, like a robot politician or something. They're not, they're a human being. And I have found by just getting involved and showing up and getting a seat at the table, doors just continue to open. And I'm so excited to share, and a couple of you know this because I reached out to you, but I was approached by the 2 largest institutions that cover all allergists and all immunologists. They're looking for patients to help inform updated guidelines on eczema. This is so huge. And this is something that I realized this is what we need. Because if these guidelines are changed, this is what all the doctors look to on how to treat eczema. They only get a very small portion in the university learning about this, but they go to these guidelines. So if patients like you and me can be involved in the process and say, listen, it's not okay to prescribe steroids long-term for patients. There need to be breaks. There needs to be monitoring. We can prevent this. It's so huge. And all of those things are happening now because of showing up. So this is something that you can get involved in too. Like I said, it could be local, it could be your state, your country. You could affect change in the whole wide world.
It's very empowering because the only way any change gets made is because one person decides that it needs to happen.
Yes.
So it starts with us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Rocky, I think you had a question about the FDA link. Do you want to go off mute and?
Yes, so I had a question. I'm actually on the page because I wanted to fill it out while we were on the call. So there's 2 links, one that says health professional FDA form 3500, and then there's the consumer patient 3500B. Consumer patient. Could you also have a healthcare professional? So say someone here has a really supportive healthcare professional, could their provider go on and they can request, would that be taken more seriously?
Yes.
3500 form?
Yes, they can. And if you have that, yeah, that's a great suggestion. Go to your doctor and request that and both fill them out. And I would also suggest fill out every form you can. If you're in another country, do your country's version, do the FDA, report it to the manufacturer. I would say report it to everyone. The manufacturer will say you only need to do one or the other. But I would say I want this in front of their face and I want them to see it a lot. So I would say report every which way you can. So great point. Thanks for that, Rocky.
Yeah, they're actually required to report adverse outcomes as well. I think it's a different link that they use, but they are required to do that anyway. So you might remind them that this might be considered an adverse outcome.
They can do both. There is internal reporting. I know, like in my experience as a nurse, we have to tell on ourselves if we make mistakes, but then, yeah, if they can report also to the FDA, something they have observed in a patient, I think, yeah, go for it.
There's a question about the name change, or Kara. Mine is just a general question. The name TSW doesn't cover everyone who has suffered. So we've been calling it a TSW syndrome because it's not just red skin. And by the way, not everyone gets red skin, right? It presents differently if you are lucky enough to have some pigment. I'm not on that list, but I think we're calling it TSW syndrome at this point. I'm not sure if I understand the question.
I think that we defer a lot also to what is in the literature. And so years ago, all that was in the literature was red skin syndrome, right? And so now we're kind of deferring to what is being published because that's what's taken seriously by our doctors. So we realize it's not a great term. It really isn't. I think that damage is more appropriate than withdrawal because I think your withdrawal phase is kind of short, but the damage you're dealing with and the healing is long. So it's not a great term. It's an umbrella term that is recognized medically. And so we're kind of stuck with it for now.
And the term withdrawal is a medical term. It was considered a medical withdrawal. But to me, it just brings up images of us like going into the back room jonesing for more steroids, like, oh, I got to get my steroid fix. And it's not like that, like even a little bit. So yeah, I think the name has always been a bit of a challenge. We are going to move into the next session now. This is mental health during TSW. There are some other questions that I did capture in the chat, and in the breakout session, I think those are probably more appropriate for the breakout than for necessarily advocacy, but really good questions about some medications and options there. So let's go ahead and turn this over to Angela.
Okay, so thank you. We're gonna go to our mental health professor. She's going to inform us about kind of what we go through and what we're facing, especially when you're seeing doctors who may or may not believe you. So I'm going to give you a little intro to Angela Tiru. She is here with us from the state of Connecticut in the United States, where she's professor of psychology with over 20 years experience in the college classroom. She teaches undergraduate courses, including lifespan development, abnormal psychology, and social psychology, to name a few. She holds a master's degree in experimental psychology from the University of Hartford with a focus on health psychology. Angela Tiru became aware of ITSAN, like many of us, through experience. Her son has suffered from TSW, and the experience made it clear that her expertise in psychology and knowledge with trauma, gaslighting, and PTSD applied to the TSW experience. And so she's here with us today to talk about that. So on a personal note, I've spoken to Angela many times on the phone and online to bounce ideas off her and discuss research. I think she may be the most well-read, knowledgeable person about eczema and various treatments and TSW that I've ever met. So I'm so happy that she's here with us. Before I completely turn the time over to you, Angela, I wanted to do our quick poll, if we could, Amy. Okay, have you struggled with your mental health during TSW, yes or no? And have you ever sought treatment for your mental health due to TSW? And when you're ready, Amy, if you could post the results. Okay, So this looks like a big problem. And why we ask these two questions differently is we know a lot of people struggle. 93%, that's high. But only 38% have sought treatment and sought help. And so we really just kind of wanted to highlight that it's okay to get help, and please do. This is a very common problem in our community. So thank you for that. Angela, I'm going to turn the time over to you and share your screen, and we're ready for you to present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm so humbled by that introduction, and you are a rock star and a dear friend. Thank you. Let me share my screen. All right, warriors and advocates, thank you for having me today. I'm going to go over a quick overview of mental health concerns associated with topical steroid withdrawal. There are many, but then I'll focus on trauma and medical gaslighting, and we'll finish with some coping mechanisms. Kathy gave me such an awesome introduction. I will skip a bunch of this, but I do want to at least say that a lot of the courses that I teach in developmental psychology, developmental psychologists focus on how our biology, how our psychological experiences, and how our social environment shape who we are. So this very much applies to any experience, even TSW. As she said, the real reason I'm here today is as a TSW caregiver and mom. My cute little guy in the middle there, he's 10 now, and he's 15 months TSW. And that experience really just altered me to the core. As an academic psychologist, it's in my nature to overthink, to obsessively research. Maybe that's why Kathy said she thinks I know so much. I'm not sure, but with that being my nature, seeing my son deteriorate before my eyes so quickly, I might add, just didn't make sense to me. Within months of using topical steroids, we used a popular regimen. He began first having new allergies. So he had his first experience with hay fever, was very uncomfortable, went to the pediatrician. They gave us some nasal steroids. 1 month later, he had his very first experience with asthma, back to the doctors, some more steroids, an inhaler. About a month after that, he developed a new face rash. He never had any facial concerns. He had what I would call basic eczema on his arms and legs. This facial rash was diagnosed as perioral dermatitis, steroid induced by his inhaler. And for me, that was like a first real red flag. I felt like, wait a minute, I'm using a steroid for rashes. And now you're telling me that we have a rash from steroids. And they instructed me to continue with the steroids on his body, but to never put any on his face, even though I never had, besides the asthma inhaler. And I also want to emphasize that all of this happened in just 6 months. So my analytical academic mind was just not satisfied with the whole atopic march explanation that was given to me. And so that's when I started my research or obsession, because I really saw this pattern of the more that I was doing or instructed to do, the worse that he was getting. And that's really what led me here today. I do just want to start with a really quick disclaimer that I'm not a licensed clinical psychologist. I don't treat patients, and I'm not an overall expert on trauma. I am an academic psychologist, and I'm here sharing some mental health information and how I see that it applies to the TSW experience. And of course, as it was already mentioned today, seek help. Absolutely, professional help, social support, and the groups and everyone here is amazing for that too. One more quick shout out that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I do believe that we are progressing when it comes to awareness and even reducing stigma, but I do also see that we have a long way to go when it comes to access to treatment and quality of treatment. So topical steroid withdrawal and mental health. There are many conditions that are associated with this TSW experience. Of course, depression and anxiety in the general population, 50% of people experience depression and anxiety. In TSW, I would say 100. I know we just did a poll and it was, 93, 96? But very prevalent, very severe. Social isolation. Many of you guys have described months and years of social isolation. There's a study done that described social isolation is as detrimental to one's health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Any studies that I reference, I could leave references in the comments or provide them after. Sleep disturbance behaviors, huge. Stress. Both of these disrupt our circadian rhythm, disrupt our hormones, which disrupt nutrition absorption, increase mood disorders, and increase overall stress response. Obsessive behaviors, I'll talk a little bit more about that with coping mechanisms later. Stigma and shame, I was glad this was just mentioned, but I also, as a psychologist and work with substance abuse topics, just the word addict has a stigma to it, and trying to explain a condition to people, and then you say the word addict and it's an additional challenge. Developmental delays. When I look at TSW, I really think that there are unique challenges based on the age and the stage that you're experiencing it. For infants and toddlers, in the first 1,000 days of life, 80% of brain development occurs. If you're going through a traumatic event, it's going to have long-term effects on how the brain adapts to stress. And so that's a unique difference for having TSW in infancy and early childhood. There's some benefits. You have full care, you don't have responsibilities, and you might not even recall it, but there's some unique challenges. Tweens, teens, young adults. In this stage, what we're supposed to be doing is gaining a sense of self, who we are, who we want to be, creating meaningful relationships, and experiencing TSW at this stage has long-term effects on social and emotional well-being. While if you look at late adulthood and experiencing TSW, again, different set of challenges. As the body ages, it heals slower, so you probably are going to have a more challenging healing experience. It's also harder to find people to care for you because you're the grown-up and you're supposed to be handling the responsibilities. And other challenges, maybe children and financial troubles. So all of this applies to having different mental health consequences and challenges. But for today, because I could honestly talk about this for days, I'm going to do my best at just talking about gaslighting, trauma, and PTSD in detail. Gaslighting, what is it? Gaslighting is a form of manipulation, psychological abuse, emotional abuse. Essentially what it does is cause one to start to question their reality, to start to deny their own evidence. And this was originally talked about in the sense of relationships. I'll give a very quick scenario of what this sounds like, how it was originally understood in relationships. Let's say a wife were to ask her husband if he's having an affair. A textbook gaslighter response would go something like this. How could you believe I would ever have an affair? You must be preoccupied with an affair yourself. You're just suspicious. In this sense, the gaslighter has denied the issue, accused her of trying to hide her own actions, and is blaming her for the problems overall in the relationship. This type of language or gaslighting language can sound like, it was just a joke, get a sense of humor. You're so insecure. Could you hear yourself? I never said that. You're overreacting. This is why nobody likes you. You're too sensitive. This idea of gaslighting has, been around for a few decades, but gaslighting in the medical field has also been prevalent. Originally seen in invisible disorders. This is where patients were trying to explain symptoms for conditions that were unknown, especially things like pain and autoimmune conditions. These physical conditions that had unknown causes, a lot of times you would hear the language that would sound very much like gaslighting, and they would make these physical symptoms appear to be psychological or just completely made up. Rheumatoid arthritis is probably one of these before it was more understood. So gaslighting and TSW involves all of the strategies used in gaslighting, and it feels like being kicked when you're down, like someone's just kicking you when you're down. What it sounds like, and what many of us have heard, unfortunately, is you're steroid phobic. Your condition is from overusing steroids, almost blaming you. This is just untreated eczema, not TSW. Not willing to look at any evidence or data or published literature that you bring in, even dismissing your healing. Oh, that's just the nature of eczema. It comes and goes. TSW is rare. TSW is only after decades of misuse. This was something that I experienced with my son, because even before I even knew about it, I thought it just can't be. We only used this for a few months. Or, you will not heal without medical intervention. Looking at how these strategies and how they're used, countering, for example, is questioning your memory. Are you sure you used the amount that I prescribed, these fingertip units, if that was even discussed? Withholding, refusing to engage in conversation. Just, TSW isn't real. Or withholding when you're asking for additional tests. Can we do a swab? Is there bacteria? I don't want to use steroids, but I have some other concerns. Trivializing, belittling your feelings or disregarding them. This is, steroid phobic. These are not rational concerns. It's rare, or, not acknowledging that TSW is real. Denial is, denying something occurred or pretends to forget events. When you're trying to show patterns, so you're giving evidence and you're saying, well, every time I try to taper off because I know I'm not supposed to overuse, I end up having a rebound flare, and then we use prednisone, and don't you remember, and now we're back here again, and that's why I'm concerned. That's how that language can sound. Diverting changes the focus of a discussion and can also feel like questioning your credibility. You try to talk about TSW and you might hear, well, let's talk about other options. How about some immunos or Dupixent or something else, when that was not where you were hoping the conversation would go. Experiencing gaslighting is traumatic. It's incredibly stressful to look for support and instead start to question your decisions. I know as a caregiver, it's especially scary when you don't have medical support and you're worried about looking like you're not doing, or feeling like you're not doing the best for your children. If you do experience this, my recommendation at the very least would be to, remain calm if you can, and to validate that this is not my experience. We're not agreeing, and I would like this noted. And I'd also like it noted that I provided, documentation, whether it's literature, and that I'm asking for additional tests. And I want this in case I'm seeing a different practitioner, that this is in my records, in my files. But this type of gaslighting in combination with the physical and mental suffering of the TSW experience, absolutely is a trauma experience. I do want to start with a quick trigger warning that if you're experiencing trauma and we're talking about trauma, that in and of itself is stressful. So if you are uncomfortable, absolutely, it's optional. So in talking about trauma, when most people hear the word trauma, what they associate with trauma is veterans, sexual assault victims, child abuse, horrific events like natural disasters, car accidents. All of these are trauma experiences, but they do have subtle differences. Sometimes a trauma experience could be a singular event, like a natural disaster or car accident. This type of trauma often involves associations. These associations can be triggers. So if you experienced a horrific flood, it's very likely that water would be a trigger. And for this type of experience, let's say going on a cruise is probably not something that this person's going to find enjoyable, and how that can be so different for someone else. So these triggers and these experiences are very, and associations are very individualized. Trauma can also come in a slow, prolonged process. And in this type of trauma is what I think more closely relates to TSW. The key element is control or lack of control. When someone cannot control their situation or their environment for a prolonged period of time, it leads to trauma. Our understanding of trauma has changed a lot in the last decade or so. And this aspect of lack of control is more of a significant player in trauma. I'd like to kind of describe what I mean by control by sharing a little bit of a scenario in a type of trauma that's a little bit more understood by the general population, and then we can relate that to TSW. If we were to take child abuse, for example, and look at this lack of control through a scenario, let's say a child has an addict as a parent and an unstable environment. This child comes home from school one day, they have some schoolwork with them, and they have some homework that has a check plus plus on it. This day, their parent had enough of their favorite drug of choice. The parent sees the check plus plus and goes wild with excitement, overjoyed, exaggerated happiness. Let's party, let's celebrate, ice cream, tons of love, tons of attention. This equals happy child. Another day, the child gets another check plus plus. It's only human nature for children, for all of us, to calculate and predict what will happen based on past experiences. So this child thinks they're going to be met with the same response that they had the last time that they had check plus plus. But this day, the parent did not have just enough, their favorite substance, and in turn is not going to respond the same. The child comes home, they go in their parents' room with their check plus plus, and instead of being met with happiness, they're met with punishment and abuse. How dare you come in here? What did I tell you about bothering me? Et cetera, followed by punishment and abuse. This is an unpredictable environment. This is lack of control. This is instability. And this volatile nature of the parent leads to something called learned helplessness. It feels like walking on eggshells because you don't know what to expect. You can't predict your environment. You can't predict outcomes. Now I'd like you to replace the word parent with the word skin. Your skin is unpredictable and unstable. You lack control. You obsessively search for this stability and control. I did this, I still do this. You hear it all over the support groups. One day, your check plus plus is a moisturizer. It works, it feels nice. You think you figured something out, a small amount of relief that you can count on. But the next day, that check plus plus moisturizer burns like hell's fire. Confused. Now what do? We start to micromanage, obsess, overanalyze. We think about everything, every topical, everything that touches our skin. Should I even use anything? Should I do no moisturizing treatment? Baths versus showers, additives in the baths, supplements, patterns. You know, what is my skin doing? Where should I be in this timeline? 6 months, a year? Is it food? Maybe it wasn't the Check Plus Plus moisturizer. Maybe it's something I ate. Maybe I can go back to that Check Plus Plus moisturizer and just not eat what I ate yesterday. Should I go in the sun like Dr. Rappaport says? Should I have no sun like Dr. Sato says? What if it's my clothes? Air filters, water filters. Maybe it's me stressing myself out, doing all of this obsessing, and it's none of the above. It's sleep, light therapy, red light therapy, blue light therapy, UVB therapy. Is it staph? Is it fungus? Is it yeast? And on and on and on. These conversations and this searching is searching for control. Searching for a way to control your unpredictable skin equals a trauma experience. So TSW, the trauma of TSW in a prolonged sense is very likely to lead to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is when a body has a learned response to a set of stimuli. And this again is very unique for what those stimuli or those triggers can be. I like to think of PTSD as kind of transitioning from survival mode, you know, deep trauma, to more of highs and lows, having periods of where your skin is starting to heal physically, but your mental health and the language and the thoughts that you're experiencing is lagging behind. It's still a bit more in survival mode and easily triggered. PTSD is essentially an anxiety disorder involving triggers and associations. It's very individualized. For my son, having done a very strict cream regimen, he is absolutely triggered by putting anything on his skin. But for someone else, if they found relief in some type of topical, that can actually be soothing. So that's what's really challenging, is trying to find or be aware of what is soothing and what is triggering and what you associate with trauma, and trying to change some of these triggered responses. I've heard people in some of the support groups say that they've literally moved homes after TSW because, you know, they spent 2 years stuck in their house, for example, and the last thing they want to do is be home. So they're moving. And this would be, you know, their home feels like a trigger. So what do we do with TSW, trauma, PTSD? Whether you're aware of it or not, we all have coping strategies or coping mechanisms. These are anything that are positive or negative that begin in survival mode, but they can remain long after. Coping strategies are looked at as being adaptive versus maladaptive. Very simply, adaptive coping strategies are something that's healthy, something that reduces stress, something that, you know, feels good without long-term negative consequences. We can look at adaptive coping strategies as either problem focused, meaning you're trying to find a solution, you're seeking relief. This is something that I did obsessively. For example, if I heard something about red light therapy in one of the support groups, my problem focused coping method would be researching everything about red light therapy. What is it? Why does it reduce inflammation? What is the, you know, mechanism of action behind the scenes? Why does it supposedly increase collagen? And I want to know everything about it and what it does, and if it'll help. We'd see that as problem focused. Emotion focused coping mechanisms very simply reduce stress. Sometimes they just feel good. So if you're, binging on Netflix and it feels nice, it works. It's emotion focused coping mechanisms. Maladaptive coping mechanisms are just the exact opposite. They can sometimes cause further problems. So they might temporarily feel good, but in long term can lead to another set of problems. In the world of trauma outside of TSW, one of the biggest issues is substance abuse. So when people experience trauma and they don't process that, quite often they start self-medicating, which is substance abuse. And this is the concept where you started with one problem and then your coping mechanism eventually left you with a different set of problems. So I do like to say, whatever your coping mechanism is, sometimes it can appear to be good or adaptive, but there's a fine line between something that's adaptive and something that can turn maladaptive. And I can go back to my quick example where I would obsessively be researching. I, like many, found I would experience extreme anxiety at night. Nights sleeping was impossible. My son would sleep with me, and whatever he needed for distraction, sometimes movies, iPad, ice packs, whatever it was, but I was often rubbing him with one hand and on Google Scholar with my other hand. And that for me was adaptive. But there would be many nights where it would be that point in time where my son would finally fall asleep, and I didn't. I continued to read and research and stress and obsess about what I could do. And that is where a coping strategy can quickly go from adaptive to maladaptive, because I could be sleeping for 2 or 3 hours and instead I'm still researching. So I'd like to finish today with just encouraging you guys to reflect on what your coping strategies are. What works for one obviously doesn't work for someone else. Forms of distraction, stress reduction, enjoyment. And one of the most important coping mechanisms is connection. Human connection releases a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is sometimes called the cuddle hormone. And oxytocin reduces the physical detriments of stress hormones. It's like the anti-stress hormone. And so this community and people talking and friends and family and having eye contact and someone listening to you causes your body to produce oxytocin, and it helps. It helps, even though it doesn't obviously cure TSW, but it's an excellent coping strategy. And one other thing that I can say about trauma and what we know about resilience in the field of trauma, looking at why one person can experience horrific events and somehow rise above, almost come out stronger, versus another individual who can have very similar events and just crumble under pressure. That's the idea of resilience. And what's the difference between person A and B? And one little piece of evidence that we have is having positive experiences mixed in with negative experiences increases resilience. So for me, with my son, I have 3 small children, was struggling. But if I knew that there was a small window between like 7 and 8 p.m. where it's not sunny, it's not hot, we've been inside all day, I've been trying to distract them, we're not doing things the kids want to do, we're not going outside, we're not going in the pool, but between 7 and 8, I can take them, somewhere where they can be a kid. My son would sometimes say to me, "Mommy, I want to go fishing." I absolutely did not want to go fishing. I was exhausted and tired. But what would I do at 6:37 when the weather cooled down? I would go fishing for an hour. Absolutely grab a popsicle on the way home. And it was something positive mixed in with that traumatic experience for all of us. And so I would just like to finish today with asking you guys, are your coping mechanisms serving you? And absolutely thank you for inviting me here. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, ITSAN.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that. I've just like been in the chat and everyone is like, amen, preach. I feel heard. I feel seen. Someone finally gets what I'm going through. So it's been really positive and we really appreciate it. We're a bit over time. We were going to have some Q&A, which we're going to have to skip. But if you,
sorry,
it's okay. I didn't want to interrupt because it was really good information. But if you guys want to put your questions in the chat, we can definitely send them over to Angela. We can do like a blog post or a webinar. We were even talking about possibly doing a series with her because she's such a wealth of knowledge and information, and this is really important. Mental health, as you know, Kelly's slide was showing, is so important in our community, and there are a lot of unmet needs there. So thank you so much, Angela. I'm going to turn the time over to you, Michelle. I think this is a great time to go into our guided mindfulness meditation. So take it away, Michelle.
So much, Angela. That was such relatable content. And I think it's safe to say a lot of us have experienced what you talked about. So thank you, thank you. So to follow up on this theme of mental health and TSW, Katie Jonzen will be leading us through a mindful meditation to help calm our body and mind. So she's a TSW warrior as well, and an intuitive life coach who holds space for deep transformation and self-actualization. Since she's in Singapore, she has recorded this for us in advance, and it will be made available to you after the conference as well. So please make yourselves comfortable and let's collectively make space to heal together. This is a 15-minute meditation. I'm really excited to have, close to 100 of us doing this meditation together. So sit on the floor, sit on your bed, relax. Katie, if you've heard her speak, has the most relaxing voice. So enjoy. As it loads, you can keep your camera off, keep it on. It's really up to you.
Hello everyone, friends from all across the world. Thank you so much for being here with me today with your beautiful presence. If you don't know me, my name's Katie Jonzen. I'm a fellow TSW warrior, and I just feel so grateful to be sharing this meditation with you today, which is all about connecting to your inner spark to return you back to your light, that flame that burns within. Perhaps it's been a bit of a dark time for you recently. Maybe it's been very heavy recently. I feel that you're not alone. Maybe you've been stressed out about work or your health, or maybe there have been other things that are just completely out of your control. They've been weighing heavily on you. I invite you to release all of this weight just for now. I want you to know and feel that you are safe to be here now. let's begin by connecting to the breath together. We'll just take 3 simple breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth when you're ready. In through the nose and exhale through the mouth. Feel free to make it quite audible, so in through the nose and sigh out the mouth. And once again, in through the nose and out through the mouth. Now, I just want you to get comfortable, either sitting down or lying down. I invite you to close down your eyes if you haven't already. Your palms can either be resting on your knees, facing up or down, or if you're lying down, feel free to rest them on your chest or on your belly. Really just whatever feels comfortable for you. Now relax your chest and let out a sigh, and really feel your chest as you exhale, just releasing that any air that you're holding in, any tension that you're holding in. Feel free to give a little shake out. And now with the inhale, feel your chest rising as it fills up with air, gently moving through you as it expands across your ribs. And exhale, feel the air traveling out your mouth as your chest falls. Again, take a deep breath in, inviting your belly to expand as you draw the air in. Feel your ribs expand again as you fill with air. A moment to pause and notice that point between the in and out breath where there is total stillness. And exhale. Continue breathing normally, watching your breath, paying close attention to the pause between the inhale and the exhale. You don't need to pay any attention to anything that's happening around you. You are safe to be here now. There are no distractions that need your attention. So I'm inviting myself to tune out the background traffic noise that has been, quite frankly, bugging me whilst I've been trying to record this. But it's okay, I'm here, I'm safe to be here now. I'm connecting to my breath. I can rest in this stillness for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I'm safe to be here now. If you find your thoughts wandering, simply bring your attention back to the point of stillness between the inhale and the exhale. This is not about clearing your thoughts. It is simply about being in awareness, holding yourself in gentle awareness. If and when you notice your mind beginning to wander, simply and gently bring your attention back to the breath, reminding yourself gently that it is safe for you to be here now. It is so peaceful, so divine, so healing to be still like this. Nothing outside of you needs your attention right now. Now I'm just going to guide us into a little visualization. So I'd like to invite you to imagine a spark of golden light. A tiny little spark of golden light right in the center of your heart space. Pay attention to what it looks like. It might be surrounded by darkness, and that's okay. Maybe it looks like a small flame, like a candle or a match. Or it could be a swirling orb of light. For me, it looks kind of like the sun, a tiny little sun hovering in my heart, full of life-giving energy and warmth. Feel free to bring your palms to your chest and imagine that feeling of warmth, of this tiny spark of light in your hands. As you inhale, imagine the spark swelling and growing bigger across your chest. And as you exhale, it expands outwards, exploding very gently, moving across your chest, across your heart space. With each inhale and exhale, you see this beautiful light expanding like a flower blossoming, petals gently curling open, swelling outwards, taking up more and more space in your body as it blooms and radiates outwards to your shoulders, your arms, your hands, down your ribs, your belly, your legs. You feel it traveling all across your body and outwards even further until your entire body is flooded with this beautiful, warm, golden light. You're surrounded by this golden light. It radiates out from you into the world around you. With every breath you take, you feel it radiating brighter outwards, emanating from your heart out into the world. Now I want you to imagine that we're all sitting in a circle facing each other, all with this beautiful glowing light flooding and flowing from our beings and pouring outwards, connecting with one another. The same light magnetized and drawn to each other, and as the light connects to each other, it burns even brighter. It feels so warm and healing to be in this space, so safe, so light yet so grounding, so joyful, peaceful, healing, and still. You might even know some people within this circle. Maybe you recognize their faces and you have a gentle smile in acknowledgement of the light that you share, of the kindness that you have received and the kindness and love that you have extended in this community. It is so beautiful to be part of this family. So beautiful to recognize your light and the light of others around you. To know the power of your light, the power it has to change the lives of everyone around you. We all have this inner spark, this love, kindness, peace, ability to heal ourselves and others. It's a fire that burns within us, and by connecting with it and feeding it with loving intention and attention, you can nurture this flame to grow bigger and brighter. This beautiful, healing, cleansing, uplifting, nourishing and balancing light. And you can return to this anytime. I'm just going to invite you to place your hands on your chest if you haven't already, one on top of the other, and imagine all the light concentrating back into your heart space. Feel the love that you hold for yourself and others in this space or in your life. Feel all of that beautiful love here collecting back into your heart space. All of that light flooding back to your heart. You're so worthy of all of this love that you have, that you've been receiving, that you've been giving. Feel it returning back to that tiny little small spark of intensely bright golden light. Like a tiny sun, a tiny orb of golden light in your heart, burning with pure peace, joy, harmony, healing, and love. May you bring this love with you to all that you meet, including and especially yourself. When the days feel dark, remember this light. Breathe in and out and remember to extend it to yourself as often as possible. This is the flame of your passion for life. And maybe you felt disconnected from it for a while, and that's okay. But this is yours. Your love for yourself and for others is so powerful, is so capable of the greatest things, so beautiful, so divine, so magical. Now take a deep breath in through your nose and imagine that light flooding back out through your body again. And as you exhale, it expands outwards again, filling every part of your being with love, healing, kindness, and light. Take another deep breath in. Notice the stillness and peace here. And exhale. I invite you to bring your palms together and just rub them gently to generate a little bit of warmth between your palms. And gently place them over your closed eyes. Take a breath in. And as you exhale, open your eyes behind your palms. And now release your palms and gently bring them together in front of your chest with your eyes open. Gently taking in your surroundings and feeling grounded where you are. In your body, in your breath, in your light. Now take the deepest breath in of the day. Pause and feel the stillness here. And exhale. The light in me recognizes and connects to the light in you. Namaste.
Oh, wow. I don't have words for that. I knew this was going to be really powerful, and I just felt like all of us on this call doing the same meditation was super incredible. So thank you everyone for joining Katie and ITSAN for that meditation. And I think I'm going to hand it off to Jodie to introduce our breakout sessions.
Yes. Yes, I feel compelled to have a very soothing voice now.
Okay, well then I'm gonna wrap it up. Just want to say thank you to everybody who came and who participated in our breakout rooms. It was really emotional, I think, in both rooms. Just I was in the little kids' room drawing cartoons, and that was really cute and just nice to see them kind of getting their mind off things for a little bit. We had kiddos like in all stages and in their little beds and drawing their cartoons, and it was really great. And then just with the moms, the other group I was in, it's a rough road, and I just want everyone to know, like, we're all here for each other, and this is what community is all about. So I I can't believe this is over. We've been planning this for months, and it's just like, wow, it happened, and now we're here. So it's just been really lovely to be with all of you people, and who understand, and lovely to be with others who understand your experience and who validate you, who let you feel like you're not alone. ITSAN has introduced me to, I'm gonna cry, but some of the best people I've ever known, the most lovely, selfless people who take time out of their lives because they care about other people, not because they have time, not because they have money, not because of any of those things, but because they care about people. And it's been really touching. And so as I wrap up, I just so thank the current ITSAN board for all of your love, support, care for everyone in this community, everything that you do for everyone. If everybody, just kind of hold space for these amazing women. I also wanted to acknowledge a few volunteers over the past year who have kind of gone above and beyond. And first, I want to acknowledge 2 ITSAN board members who left us. Their terms were up. And first, I just want to acknowledge Dr. Molly Evans, former school principal. She came on the scene 2 years ago. She took over our social media and she really elevated it. She's posting and creating posts for every single day during her term on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. She hosted monthly webinars to inform and educate, and her ability to reach people, to encourage, and to inspire will long be felt and appreciated. So thank you, Molly. And here, I just want to also add, Renata Feiner was another volunteer. Molly created the posts, but Renata posted them, and she posted them manually in all 3 of our social media the whole time until we got a program that could auto post for us a few months ago. So big shout out to Renata also. Next, I wanted to recognize Rochelle Richter. Rochelle is actually one of the first people I found online in 2013. So she's been in this a long time. She had a vlog. Do you remember vlogs, video vlogs? And she put the camera all over her skin to show how she was healed. And I don't know how many times I watched that thing, just holding on to hope and listening to her story. And so when I first met her, I was really fangirling. And so anyway, the last few years, she's been our treasurer, and she's one of our ITSAN pioneers, and we will really miss her, and we're really grateful for her service. Last but not least, we need to recognize amazing work done by ITSAN volunteer Santiago Offrink. Many of you probably took part in completing our survey, the ITSAN AAN survey this past winter. And if you remember, it took around 20 minutes to complete. Santi took that beast of a survey and he translated it into Spanish, and so that more people could be reached and gather more information from more countries. And he did this out of the kindness of his heart, and we couldn't be more grateful. So thank you, Santi. So before we wrap up, I have a few bullet points just to remind you of ways you can connect with us and keep current, and maybe some of the ways you can help. Just to reiterate, you can sign up for the ITSAN newsletter right on our landing page on itsan.org. There's a banner at the bottom, and there's also a link in one of the boxes that talks about newsletter. You click on the link. So there's two ways you can sign up for that. Please use Amazon Smile in the US. We wish it could be in other countries, but Amazon won't recognize it since we are US based, even though we serve an international population. So right now it is just a US based thing, but if you're in the US, please use Amazon Smile. And don't forget to donate, especially if you enjoy this conference, for instance. Please think about giving back. We had over 250 people register, and so think about the impact that 250 people could make with their donations. There's no such thing as a small donation when we have big numbers of people. And last but not least, do not forget to report your adverse effects to the FDA or to whatever regulatory agency is in your country. Everyone can fill out a report to the FDA though, and you just use this drop down to say your country. And so please do that. And it takes actions like this to show the real problem and the real numbers, and so we can create change. So we have so much to look forward to. ITSAN is involved in several work groups with other patient advocacy groups whose aim is to publish And so between those opportunities and publishing our own survey results, someday, not in the not too distant future, ITSAN board members will be published authors educating the medical world about TSW. And this is amazing. I couldn't imagine this 5-6 years ago. It's a real dream come true. So I wanted to conclude. The song came in my mind that I used to sing at summer camp, and I wanted to read you a few words from it. So when the day is dark and dreary, and your way is hard to find, don't let your heart be weary. Just keep this thought in mind. It is better to light just one little candle than to stumble in the dark. Better far that you light just one little candle. All you need is a tiny spark. And if everyone lit just one little candle, what a bright world this would be. So I just wanted to leave those words with you as we conclude our Spark conference, that, you know, we all bring our own individual spark to this community to light the way for others and collectively create this huge light that will shine and guide people. And so thank you so much for joining with us today. That's all that I have. If any other board members want to say anything, we'll wrap up, and thank you for being here. Goodbye.
Just want to say thank you for coming, and so proud of all of you for sticking with it. I know that this is such a hard journey, and just know that you're not alone. We're in this together, and I'm just really, really proud of this community.
Same. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day, night, middle of the night, wherever you are. Good to see you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.